Okay, we're live.
All right, good evening, everyone. I'll call the general committee meeting of Barrie City Council to order. Welcome to our virtual meeting due to the COVID-19 pandemic physical distancing measures. Council, all members of council, executive management, and the city clerk are participating tonight via video conference. The senior leadership team who have reports on tonight's agenda are not visible, but they are available to answer questions if we have any associated with our lengthy agenda tonight. So the first item of business is the consent agenda. I'll read out the title associated with the recommended motions from the staff reports and the items for discussion. Please ask if you wish to hold the item for further discussion. If the item is not held, the motion that's printed on the agenda is deemed to be approved on consent and will go forward to City Council for our consideration at our next meeting. So running through the consent agenda, we'll start with the reports of reference advisory or special committees. The report of the City Building Committee from May 11th, 2021 is to be received. City Building Committees recommended a number of motions. First, a motion referred by City Council on April 26, 2021. That is with regards to the proposed Bradford bypass.
Hold, please.
Held by Councillor Kungle. Next item from City Building Committee was with regards to 70 and 72 Dunlop Street East, a sign installation. It's an amended application to alter a designated heritage building. No holds on that, it is approved. We have an amendment to the Active Transportation and Sustainability Committee's terms of reference related to the committee composition. No holds on that, it is approved. City Building Committee also recommended reducing an item regarding reducing GHG emissions through park and yard naturalization and education. No holds on that, it is approved, and I'll just note there's a correction to the wording in paragraph 2 that's noted on additions, directing this to business performance and environmental sustainability internally rather than to access Barrie. So that is noted on additions. Finally, from City Building Committee that day, we had an Active Transportation and Sustainability Committee webpage, an item with regards to that. No holds on that. That item is approved. Staff reports tonight. First staff report with regards to naming rights agreement extensions. No holds, that is approved. We have the approval of Whiskey Creek at Minette's Point Drainage Improvements Report. No holds, that is approved. We have an interim update to the Barrie Public Art Policy. No holds, that is the interim update, it is approved. We have an item regarding modular supportive housing, the modular supportive housing project that had been considered for Vespra and Victoria Streets. No holds, okay, that is approved. We have an item on the City of Barrie Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan. That is the approval of the plan.
Hold, please.
Held by Councillor Kungle. We have an item on 2021 tax rates. No holds. That is to approve the rates that were discussed a little earlier in the year. 2021 Downtown Barrie Business Association levy.
Hold, please.
Held by Councillor Ridma. We have a staff report on the 2021 property tax clawback rates. No holds. That is approved. We have the item related to the presentation. That's the water and wastewater system.
Hold it until after the presentation.
Yeah. Thanks, Deputy Mayor Ward. That's the water and wastewater financial plans for this year. Finally, we have an item regarding a development charge credit agreement, a staff report, excuse me, on Mapleview Drive East. It's for a new sanitary sewer and road expansion project. No holds on that. That is approved on consent. Finally, we have 7 items for discussion that have been placed by councillors tonight. First is the city declaring June 7th as Sir Robert Barrie Day, put on by Deputy Mayor Ward. No holds. That is approved. Next, we have an invitation to present to the group future majority that's put on by Councillor Natalie Harris. No holds, that is approved. We also have an item regarding a sponsorship, potential sponsorship program for speed pads, also put on by Councillor Natalie Harris. No holds, that is approved. We have an item regarding the Ontario Community Building Fund for the SADLON Arena.
Hold, please.
It's held by Deputy Mayor Warren. We have an item regarding outdoor activity restrictions put on by Councillor McCann.
Hold, please.
Held by Councillor McCann. Finally, we have an item regarding the conversion of tennis courts.
Hold, please.
Put on by Councillor McCann, held by Councillor McCann. Okay, that is the consent agenda. We will deal with those items as they, in the order they're printed on the agenda after the presentation, and that presentation we'll proceed with now. It is regarding the City of Barrie's water and wastewater financial plan. I'll now call on Gary Scanlon from Watson and Associates Economists Limited. I think we also have Nancy Neal and perhaps Mr. Baines, Navreet Baines, with us as well. But I suspect it may be just Mr. Scanlon coming into the call to make the presentation. Oh, there he is. Welcome to General Committee, Mr. Scanlon, or welcome back, and I will give you the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's a pleasure to be here before you and members of council. We have a presentation I'd like to go through quickly. We've filed 2 reports with you, one which is the water rate study and water and wastewater rate study, and then the second is a mandatory financial plan which must be submitted to the province as part of receiving your license to run your water system. So the rate studies become the base on which we then prepare that that document to submit to the province. So I just see how I take control. Or as the clerk got the presentation, I'm not quite sure whether I'm taking control or they have it.
You should be able to share your screen, Mr. Scanlon.
Okay, thank you. Is that, everyone see that?
Now we can, yes. Go ahead, Gary.
Okay, perfect. So the study is to take a look at, provide a 10-year forecast of both your capital and operating budgets, and take a look at growth within the community, and through the calculations, identify rate increases that would be required in order to address capital and operating expenditures. We've looked at not only, when we talk about capital, not only growth related capital, which is predominantly funded by development charges, but also looking at life cycle costs, asset management, if you will, over the 10-year program. As I've noted, we'll present the rates that we foresee over the next 10 years. Obviously, you'd only be considering rates in the very short term, but we'll also provide a comparison of your rates relative to many other communities in the county. As I've noted, within the completion of the rate study, you need to file a financial plan to the province, which for the most part is probably best described as taking the rate study, translating it into a financial statement format, and that's the way that the province wishes to receive the information. Our starting point is your rate structure. As you can see, you provide a basic fixed monthly charge for your residential customers. And then as the meter size goes up, that fixed charge also goes up on a monthly basis. On the bottom part, you can see that there's volume charges. So on the water side, you allow roughly consumption of about 180 cubic meters in a year, and you charge $1.10. If you cross that, the rate then doubles for that amount of water that's in that category or in that block. It goes to $2.21, and then if you exceed that block, once again, it continues to go up. Wastewater fairly emulates the water side. However, when you take a look at the block rates, which is on the bottom right-hand side, we have the first block, and then you go to a second block, and the rates are basically the same. We forecasted out over the 10-year planning horizon. Obviously, within you have two different areas: what we've labeled as the former built municipal boundary, and we forecasted about 950 units a year on that side. And within the Salem and Hewitt secondary plan areas, about 1,000 units per year. Low and medium density. So we've looked at the average consumption of your customers. And generally, they're consuming about 180 cubic meters for your low and medium density on average, and your higher densities running at about 130 cubic meters. Once again, that's based on your actual meters and actual usage. The capital program is fairly substantial. You can see on the water side, we've been looking at about $218 million in expenditures. 136 million really is asset management replacement, and the residual of that, about $80 million, is addressing growth-related infrastructure. On the wastewater side, you can see we're about $620 million. There is a sizable amount of growth-related works that'll be included in that forecast. You can see on the financing side, it's on the bottom. Development charges represent a considerable amount of the funding, either through growth-related debt, of which you will pay those debt charges through the DCs, or direct draws out of the reserve fund. You can see on the bottom, we've got non-growth related debentures and capital reserve fund, which is generally funding the works that we don't fund through development charges. If we look at your total inventory on the water and the wastewater side, to run your system, to get water into the homes and the businesses, and then to take the effluent out and treat it, you've invested about $2.6 billion in infrastructure. That's about 1.2 almost on the water side, about 1.4 on the wastewater. If you take that money and divide it just on the number of customers, that represents an investment of about $26,000 per water customer, and about almost $32,000 per wastewater customer. So in total, you're about $58,000 per customer as an investment. You can see the $314 million, which is in the middle column, is what we're forecasting over the 10-year planning horizon. That represents about 12 or 13% of your total assets. So we're moving towards, replacing the assets, but there's still a significant amount that's out there and aging over time. However, staff feel that this is a reasonable amount of investment in order to keep the water and the wastewater users being safe and environmentally sustainable. The operating budgets, for the most part, we've looked at that with staff. Over the 10-year planning horizon, we've averaged out about 2% per year for most of the operating expenditures. We have seen roughly about a 5% increase in the past 5 to 7 years for chemicals, fuel, and hydro. So we provided a little bit higher inflationary amounts for that as well. There has been some additional staffing that have been provided for over the 10-year planning horizon, and they've been incorporated. Basically, with the amount of growth that you have, there'll be additional water line cleaning, expansions to the treatment facilities, et cetera, warranting some additional staff. If we look at this would be your total operating budget. The lighter blue on the bottom represents the pure operating expenditures. So that's the day-to-day staffing costs, running the treatment facilities, cleaning the lines, water main breaks, et cetera. You can see that's about $23 million. On the capital related side, so that's debt charges, that's transferred to reserves, That's about $15 million. When we hit the end of the forecast, you can see that we go from operating costs being higher than capital to almost a 50-50 split in the allocation between the operating budget and the capital. And you can see that in the graph. The top part is the capital related, and you can see how that component of the expenditures is growing over the 10-year planning horizon. Not too dissimilar, wastewater, we've given you the operating costs and capital. You can see at this time, the capital is a little higher than what your operating budget is. And by the time we hit the end of the forecast period, there's a sizable increase in the proportion of the operating budget, which is going towards debt charges or direct transfers to reserve funds. Looking at the water and the wastewater bills, so this is a forecast. We've looked at the average 180 cubic meter residential bill. And with the rates, you can see that water is trending a little bit lower, with wastewater trending a bit higher. Remember, there's a sizable capital program for the wastewater side. You can see we're averaging roughly about 4.5% on average on a combined basis every year from this year moving forward. So we've looked to smooth the rates and try and blend them with an annual increase of about 4.5%. When we take a look at the rates and see where you are compared to many communities, oops, I'm sorry. Accidentally hit the button there. You look at your community relative to others, you can see that currently that 180 cubic meters would represent an $880 bill. With what we've represented, it would be roughly about a $40 increase, or roughly about $2.50 a year. That still places you at the bottom end in comparison to many of the other municipalities. You can see the highest being up over $2,000 for a water and a wastewater bill. That completes my presentation, Mr. Mayor. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have, or members of council.
Thank you, Mr. Scanlon. First thing I just realized is I would not want to take long showers if I lived in Tate Township. That's an extraordinary difference. Okay, members of General Committee, questions of Mr. Scanlon? Plenty of them. We'll start with Councillor Riepma.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You'd be thankful that I only have one. In your presentation, I think it was on slide 2, you forecasted that our growth would be 1,950 units every year. That's what you based it on. What impact does it have on our conclusions if those numbers are either high or low?
If through you, Mr. Mayor, if the forecast is a little on the high side, that would mean that potentially you're going to generate a bit of a surplus. And if you're on the negative side, you don't achieve those numbers, then potentially you would run into a bit of a deficit. So, you know, water, the volume side of the water and wastewater bills, they fluctuate depending on the weather. If we have a very hot year, consumption generally goes up. If we have a very wet year, consumption generally goes down. So what we've looked at is trying to forecast in the mid-range. So if you will get higher units, lower units, so we've tried to basically provide for a middle-of-the-road type of forecast.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Riepma. Councillor Kongo.
Thank you, Worship. The question I had in looking at the data, Mr. Scanlon, was now that we've got secondary suites and accessory suites, being accessory suites, my understanding was we need to have a larger diameter of water delivery system. I didn't know if we should appreciate in any way when we talk a bit about the average home, how individuals or residents would see themselves in that graph around their residential rate if they actually experienced or rented a home that had that type of a water accommodation. I wasn't sure when we talked about enlarged infrastructure if that was a typical standard, and we would be able to point to that in the table that you provided.
So for the most part, those are low and medium density housing. We are aware, obviously, with the changes with the province to kind of encourage secondary suites. I guess the issue is whether those suites will have their own separate meters or whether they'll be blended in one meter. If they're blended in 1 meter, what we'll probably see over time is the average consumption going up. And keep in mind, if they go past that 180, they now go into the second block, so they'll be paying an additional amount of funds. For the most part, we've assumed all of those new units will be staying below the 180. So if they do consume more, they'll, in essence, there'll be an additional revenue coming back to the city.
And follow up, and this might be a bit more operational for staff, because I've had some questions in the past too about when we're looking at those secondary and accessory suites around what the city can and cannot do around meters. And I'm wondering if staff could quickly speak to that about requests coming in about adding a separate meter. And typically I'm seeing this coming in from a landlord or an owner who wants to help divert the billing system about the fair share of who's using how much water, and seeing more questions coming in on that, and wondering if staff can identify what's within the landlord's responsibility for that, and that measurement of water from a meter perspective, or is there an accessory or an adaptation that's possible to water meters?
I can take a first stab at it if you'd like.
Sure, and then we'll go to Ms. Miller. Go ahead, Mr. Scanlon.
Okay. Well, I'm happy to go to Andrea Miller. I'm just saying, just out generally, I've seen municipalities accepting where it's feasible and it's accessible in order to run those additional ones. Then quite often the property owner is paying for the installation of the meters, all of the additional costs. And then, they would be, I don't want to step on if she'd like to provide a perspective from Barry's.
Go ahead, Ms. Miller.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. Through you to Councillor Kungl. Certainly, we do have provision for the separate meters, and we are seeing more of that as we are seeing particularly the accessory suites coming online. And it is something that we'll be working a protocol out in terms of some additional guidance, and we can provide a memo back to Council on those details if you're interested.
Thank you. And quick follow up at this time, I'm assuming we'll just continue to redirect any of those questions through to Service Barrie to track through around what's available at this time or what might come online later. And I'm assuming if a home is being modified at this time, is it something that can be easily done after the fact?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Kungl. Certainly, if there are residents who are currently in the process of putting additional units in place, they can contact Service Barrie, and we will have our water department reach out and clarify anything that is necessary at this time, for sure.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Miller. And I have no further questions. Thank you for the presentation.
Thanks, Councillor Kungl. Deputy Mayor Ward.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. Thanks for the presentation. Maybe it's a bit outside of the scope of your presentation, but I'm curious. Barrie has a very aggressive pricing policy. If you use a lot of water, you really pay for it. In fact, it encourages conservation. I know at one time we were fairly unique in the province. I'm curious if you know whether other municipalities have adopted it. Is that more of a common thing these days?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, what we do see is a survey I did going back 3 or 4 years ago. I haven't updated it recently. But when we looked at it, about 60% of the municipalities use, if they have a meter. Obviously, if they don't have a meter, they're on a flat rate. But for those that are on meters, about 60% use a constant rate. So if you consume 1 cubic meter, you pay $1. If you consume 1,000,000 cubic meters, you're still paying $1 per cubic meter. Your increasing block, there's about 20% of the municipalities that use that. It's the #1 best rate for encouraging conservation. And about 20% use a declining block. So they, as you consume more, the rates. Normally when we see that, or when we work on their behalf to generate them, the residential user is normally well above, or sorry, the block is well above what they consume. So it's used more for economic development. So instead of the 180, maybe we would set it at 500. And then if you use from 500 to 1,000 cubic meters, maybe we'd go from $1 down to 75 cents. And if you consume more, we drop it again. So you're about 20% of the municipalities in Ontario use a conservation rate such as yourself.
Okay, just as a follow-up, the last slide you showed, comparison of residential annual bills, that's based on 180 cubic meters.
Correct.
I'd love to claim, wow, Barrie's got really low rates, but is it actually the actual bills higher in Barrie because of the way our water rate is structured? If you use 180 cubic meters, yeah, we've got a really low rate. I'm curious if you use 250, whether we'd quickly jump up that chart.
We could provide a supplemental if you'd like. It's an easy enough calculation to present. Obviously, there's a mixed bag on what municipalities, how they structure their rates. Some have a very low monthly amount and a very large volume rate, and some have very large volume monthly amounts with very small volume rates. Collingwood, for example, because they have such a high proportion of condominium units, like more seasonal users, they have a very high fixed charge, that monthly charge, and a smaller volume because they want to make sure they're distributing the costs equitably across all of those different seasonal units. So it does vary. If the councillor wishes supplemental calculation, let's say at the 250, we'd be more than happy to provide that.
If it's easy to do, but I don't want to put in a lot of work. Just one last question then. Is 180, is that the average use? Why is that 180 used? Where's the 180 cubic meters come from as a benchmark?
Well, that is your cutoff for moving to the next block, but we take a look at actual consumption for 2017, 18, 19, and the average for the low and medium was at about 180.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor Ward. Other questions for the presenter? Okay, I don't see any. Mr. Scanlon, thank you for the work. Always important, especially with a system that is going to serve a growing city, to plan for the future and make sure that we've still got enough to keep what we own in good shape, let alone the expansions that are required to serve growth. So thanks for your expertise and for the work done for the city. We will move on with our agenda. The first item that was held tonight was from the report of the City Building Committee. It was held by Councillor Kungl. It's with regards to the proposed Bradford bypass. Councillor Kungl.
Thank you, Worship. I would like to propose that we vote on the items individually.
Okay, they can be separated. And I assume you're putting them on the floor.
I'm putting them on the floor as printed, just changing the process, please.
Yeah, for sure. Did you wish to speak to this at all?
I'll just note, we had some really good conversations at the previous couple of city building committees. There has been other correspondence that's come in since, and I believe shared with council. There's been process already determined on some of the pieces that were originally drafted. In particular, I'll note that one piece that where we might have a difference of opinions, it is my personal interest, to see good advocacy but that section 3 is one that we heard from Margaret Prophet, in particular from the Simcoe County Greenbelt Coalition, who did a presentation previously to city building, that type of scope around the Lake Simcoe Protection Act, and in accordance with that act, that we actually look at requesting the Government of Ontario to conduct a comprehensive impact assessment on Lake Simcoe and those vulnerable watersheds and inflows into Lake Simcoe. That is a piece personally I see as unique and a part of what would be included in reference to those 15 other reports. So I would like to ensure that we don't lose an opportunity should there be dissension about the different elements, that element at least can be looked at separate and apart in interest as the city of Barrie around the health and well-being of both Lake Simcoe and our watershed feeders, inflows into Lake Simcoe.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Kungle. Other comments on the motion that's on the floor? Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Your Worship. I know we've got a few members of council that sit on the Lake Simcoe Conservation Authority Board of Directors. I was just wondering if either of those individuals are able to provide any information as to the Conservation Authority involvement in this process to date.
Good question. And you're going to have to remind me, Madam Clerk, which members of council are Lake Simcoe. It's Councillor Aylwin, and is it Councillor Riepma, yourself as well? Okay, Councillor Aylwin, thanks.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman, and thanks for the question, Councillor Harvey. This is not something that's come up at our board meetings. It would probably be something at the operational level that has been discussed, but I'm not exactly sure of the involvement of the Conservation Authority. I'm not sure if Councillor Riepma has something to add on that.
I think I'm just going to say exactly what Councillor Elwin said. This matter has not been before the board at this point. It may well be coming, I don't know, but it certainly isn't there now yet.
Follow up, Mayor Lehman?
Go ahead.
Yeah, not a direct question to them. This is more of my comments. I did have an opportunity to watch City Building Committee a few days ago, and it was actually quite interesting dialogue back and forth. And I really appreciated some of the wisdom that you actually brought to the table, Mayor Lehman, with the length of time that you've been around, and having obviously a greater understanding when it comes to these matters that involve higher levels of government, and not just the provincial government, but also the federal government. And it's quite clear the federal government has already made their decision when it comes to this. They're not looking at this bypass any further. However, the 413 is a different story. I really have some concern that we're out of our lane and we're starting to embark in areas that we really don't have any business embarking on. We're dealing with something that is 40 minutes away from us to the south. It's already been supported by Simcoe County's Regional Council. It's been supported by York Region's Council. It's been supported by the town of East Gwillimbury, or it's been supported of Bradford West Gwillimbury. I really don't understand why we're getting involved in this, and also too so late in the game. Like, we're so late to the party, it's not even funny. If people felt there was a need that we should have inserted ourselves, this should have been done long ago, before the federal government made these decisions, so that way potentially our voice could be heard. But when we've got all our surrounding neighbors and county council here in our own county endorsing this, I think we're trying to climb a tree that we can't climb. And it just causes me great difficulty. And I've had some really good discussions with one of the councillors down in Bradford to get a better understanding, opposed to solely reading information that's available online through the website that's been created for this bypass, along with our staff report. But unfortunately, I think decisions have been made, and no matter, this is just a matter of writing another letter that it's almost just a little bit of lip service, really. And I just don't see that it's going to have any impact on any decisions that are being made in the future. And I couldn't fathom that the federal government is going to reverse their decision. And I seen that seemed to be quite clear from some of the comments that that you had also at committee level when these similar questions were raised. So unless I hear something dramatically different, I have difficulty in supporting this at any level with the way the motion is currently written.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Harvey. Councillor Morales.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. Councillor Harvey hit the nail on the head. I also had a chance to talk to a councillor in Bradford. And the fact is, this project has been desired, aspired to in one way or another for decades. Again, this is not something that happened overnight. This is a critical piece of infrastructure that will completely transform the economy, the travel flow, and the Bradford and surrounding area. So this is a big deal for them. Something else that I'll say, it's not only a big deal for them, it's a big deal for us. Think of the residents in all of our wards that commute to the York region, maybe even those road warriors that maybe commute to the Durham region daily. It's a big difference going, most of them will probably not want to do 400, 401 in commuting hours in a pre-COVID world. So if there was a linkage between where it's being proposed that connects them, gets them to the 404, that's a huge game changer. I used to do that, drive there and back. I usually would do 400 down, but drive back 404 and then cut across through Newmarket or Bradford. It's slow and it's slow. It's bad, and it's traffic going through the city that doesn't increase public safety for the town of Bradford or Newmarket. Doesn't make cycling any more friendly. That stop and go city driving. We all know city driving uses more gas than highway driving. So this is very necessary, and even for our own Barrie commuters, if we want to make this, why should Barrie care? This can really unlock valuable commuting time and improve quality of life for our own commuting residents. I'll have members of council know as well that the federal government, and I believe I want to get the wording right on this. Also, the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada ruled a couple weeks ago that they don't want a further study on this. They are the decision makers on a file like this. They said we are good with the provincial studies, and there's much oversight and due diligence that's being done on this in terms of studies and EAs. But they essentially said we're good to go. So if council were to ratify and adopt what city building proposed, in essence, now knowing, if you didn't know, now you know that the federal government and the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada said we're good, we don't need any further study. We're essentially saying that we want one anyways. Even though the agencies literally in charge of this said we do not require one. So, excuse me, that should be taken very strongly into consideration as well. In terms, I agree with Councillor Harvey as well. If this was something that was desired, I trust the Conservation Authority. It's not like this is on their docket or they're going to have an opinion soon. They see this has been coming for decades. So I personally don't see I don't have a desire to stall the project or add an unnecessary study that the evidence-based Impact Assessment Agency of Canada and the federal government has communicated clearly they do not want. I support the provincial government, both the current administration, but also the previous government that has done these studies and is requesting any studies to be updated and to be done again. And I commend Councillor Harvey and I know Mayor Lehman as well for doing the basic principle of reaching out to Bradford Council. Like I said, this is our project. I can only imagine if we were, think back, members of council, to the Harvey overpass, especially yourself, Councillor McCann, Deputy Mayor Ward, and Mayor Lehman. Can you imagine if we were kind of in the 11th hour of finally speeding up the Harvey overpass, and then the town of Bradford all of a sudden did a letter writing campaign to a government saying, you know what, we need a bird migration study, we need a lake something. I would be offended, not because I think that they have bad intentions. I just would have been like, hey, could you at least just pick up the phone before you do that, at least in the public sphere? And we're in the public sphere because this is being covered by media. That would be concerning to me. So I wouldn't be, again, unless they had legitimate concerns, I would be I would be frustrated if the town of Bradford in that scenario reached out, again, stalled our project without a legitimate concern, just saying we want more information, we want this, especially when the government authorities that I pointed out have said we are good to go. So again, I commend the members of council that have reached out to those representatives in Bradford. That's what they're there for. There are colleagues. There are colleagues at a county. I believe that the mayor of Bradford chairs the Affordable Housing Committee, which a lot of people have said is important to us. So, right, those are very strong bridges that we need to keep keep our relationship or our infrastructure, whether it be roads and housing, strong. So I'm not supportive of this motion in any matter. I'm going to let members of council have a discussion on, general committee have a discussion on this. I would actually almost be supportive of amending this motion to actually write a letter of support for the town of Bradford, because I want to build bridges, not impediments. And I would like to see them move forward, and the studies that have happened and the ones that need to happen by the institutions that are asking for them to occur. And then for Bradford to see the success in terms of infrastructure and travel times that we're hopefully going to see with our own infrastructure project. And that is the Harvey Overpass Bridge. Thank you, Marlene.
Thanks, Councillor Morales. Other comments? Councillor Riepma.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I think Councillor Harvey is correct. We had a very good discussion at City Building. I thought it was a thoughtful look at the question, and we did not all agree. On the other hand, this motion was passed, and I guess I'm going to support this motion. And the reason for it is, first of all, this is not just an overpass. This is a major piece of highway. I think it's 16 kilometers long. And yes, there are going to be a lot of Barrie people, if it's built, driving on it. And we have to ask ourselves whether that's going to have an environmental impact or not. And I suspect the answer is yes. The federal government in this case, and I think it's appropriate for us to write to them, simply because the federal government did require an impact assessment of Highway 413, just not very long ago. And it seems to me that while that's a longer highway, this highway has just as much impact potentially, and it ought to be looked at. And I think the other part of this is that Councilor Morales said, you know, why does the city of Barrie care? And you know, these are all our neighbors, and we need to get along. I agree with that. But the point is that the city of Barrie does care, because we surround Kempenfelt Bay, and whatever happens as a result of this facility, this highway, it's going to end up at our doorstep. And that's why we care. And I think that's why we need to support this recommendation. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Riepma. Councillor Elwin.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. I will also be supporting this item as recommended by the City Building Committee. And just to provide some quick context around where this came from, a member of the Active Transportation Sustainability Committee brought this item forward for discussion well in advance of the federal government's decision on the federal impact assessment. And then when it first came to City Building, before the decision had been made, it was then deferred to get more information from staff. So we did try to have it in before a decision was made, but that's why it's here before you today. And just quickly, because I don't want to take up too much time, because it is, as Councillor Harvey noted, just a letter, but it's an important letter, because the reality is that greenhouse gas emissions and climate change don't respect municipal boundaries. And the Lake Simcoe watershed also doesn't respect municipal boundaries. And the environmental assessment that was conducted back when I was 4 years old predicted that there would be severe water quality impacts to the groundwater and to the surface water in the Lake Simcoe watershed. And there's still no mitigation plan in place for that. And that's concerning. And that's where I think Barrie's interests are really important here. Lake Simcoe matters to our community, matters to our city. And good friends have those difficult conversations about these types of issues. So I would hope that if we had a project that affected our neighbors in that sort of way, that those municipalities would have those difficult conversations with us as well. So that's what we are trying to accomplish here. The reality is we're in a climate emergency, and building a highway, we should consider the full climate impacts of such a decision, as well as the water quality impacts. So that's why I'm supporting it today. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Owen. Any other comments? Councillor Morales.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. So I agree with the comments that greenhouse gases, climate change doesn't have borders. That's I love that thinking. Where there's no cones, there's no insulation from that. But I have to ask, if this is about not liking highways, let's write a letter that says we don't like highways. Let's not. If this is a concern about that, we think that the federal government and the agency that I've outlined are incorrect, have erred in their decision to not have a study, then so be it. But if this is about not wanting more highways because it's going to have more cars or make it easier to drive, then let's call it for what it is. I think a big mistake is to have a legitimate, both of those are legitimate concerns, but then to represent them as well, we just want another study, we want to be safe, once anyone think of the trees and the environment. Those are fair arguments. But if it's about highways and car driving, then let's pass it. Let's write a letter. Let's amend this motion and says that we do not support the construction of new highways in our region because it increases capacity for driving. Until EVs are commonplace or what have you, or public transportation. But I think misrepresenting our intentions and conveying them in we're concerned about that the federal government is wrong and that their judgment is incorrect and not requiring further study. I don't think that's fair to the town of Bradford and surrounding municipalities. So again, if that's the intent, let's amend this properly and we'll see where the votes fall. I'm not saying it's an incorrect concern to have about climate change and more cars, but I personally don't want to vote in favor of this if the real intent is somewhere else. And I think that should apply to all of the things that we pass tonight.
Thanks, Councillor Morales. Okay, I have several more. Councillor Jim Harris, you're next.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. Maybe a question through you to staff, and I imagine maybe Ms. Miller. I just wanted to clarify that I'm understanding the memorandum that staff provided us correctly. You have in the report required environmental studies. The MTO is undertaking detailed environmental studies in support of this project. And if I counted correctly, the environmental and social studies that will be completed for this project include 16 items. Is that correct? There's 16 items that are going to be done with the project as it currently exists?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Harris, that is our understanding. Yes, that is correct. And it is also my understanding that much of this work has been completed and much of it is being updated.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to make sure I got this right, that this isn't being done without environmental considerations. I thought I counted 16 different items, and I guess I didn't count it correctly. There's at least 5 different ministries involved that have environmental interests, including Fisheries, Oceans Canada, Canada Environmental Agency, Assessment Agency, Environmental and Climate Change Canada, and Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks. So those are all entities that are involved in this project. It's not just being done without considerations to the environment. Is that correct?
That is correct, Councillor Harris.
Okay, thank you. That's great to clarify. Thank you very much. That's all my questions, Mayor Lehman. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Harris. Next, I have Councillor Gary Harvey.
Thank you, Your Worship. Actually, that was a really great question you had there, Councillor Harris. And I think it really helps back the fact that why I won't support this too. And I think we have to look at it from a different perspective too. And I myself sit on a conservation board here in the county. So I'm one that's definitely for conservation, but then you have to weigh both sides of this And when you look at the fact that it will improve transportation from an economic perspective, when it comes to the transportation of goods, along with the movement of people to get to and from work, it'll eliminate countless hours of idling vehicles. And when you start looking at studies around idling vehicles, an idling vehicle emits almost twice as much CO2s over that same stretch as a vehicle that's constantly in motion. And when you offset that with other environmental concerns, I think it weighs heavier on the decisions that were probably made by government. And I can appreciate that this letter's been in the works for a while, but this particular project has been in the works since 2003. Like, this isn't something that just started recently. This has been going on for decades. And if there was a need for this to occur, this should have occurred much sooner in this term of council, so that way the appropriate letters could have been sent voicing our concerns. But even with that being said, I still think we're barking up a tree that we shouldn't be barking up. When you consider we've stayed out of the Upper York sewage debate, and realistically, I would hope we stay out of that debate, because guess where our sewage goes? Into Kempenfelt Bay. So, like, I mean, everything is obviously within guidelines of phosphorus loads and such forth, but Councillor Morales highlighted the fact that if we start encroaching on other people's areas when it comes to these projects, we can only expect the same.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Harvey. Sorry, did I see another member of council? Councillor Kunkel, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. And so, and thanks for the conversation. I guess I'll just speak once more to section 3 and kind of why I separated out, because I did believe there'd be a difference of opinions on many, but I do really want to focus on the opportunity for at least get a comment from the province about item 3. Although there are many different agencies, and including the Lake Simcoe Conservation Authority on that memo from staff, I'm not seeing anything specific as per the conversation we had with the Simcoe County Greenbelt Coalition about a focused study or at least analysis on the inflows into Lake Simcoe. So I'm just looking for, at minimum, some confidence and an opportunity to have a bit more due diligence to say, we really do want to make sure, and not to say there would be oversight, but that Lake Simcoe in particular around those inflows into the lake and the health of the lake, considering our investment and ongoing work there, is not compromised unintentionally. And so at minimum, I'm hoping, although there might be disagreement about what's passed and at what levels of government, I think in particular, item 3 does identify a key, hopefully shared interest with other boundary municipalities. And if we could get some comment or reassurance from the government that those components of the Lake Simcoe study are incorporated in some way, that would be wonderful.
Thanks, Councillor Kunkel. Any other comments? Okay, at the risk of repeating a few things I said at City Building, I did want to mention a few things. And I'm actually very supportive of, I think where Councillor Kunkel you were going with that, which is, I think number 3 is quite important, and I believe that is a Barrie interest, very specific and a general interest. And I don't think it's unreasonable that we ask for the impact assessment on Lake Simcoe, given all the work that all of us as shoreline municipalities and watershed municipalities are doing. And there is specific concern around 26-acre section of this highway that passes through the watershed that it could have a specific impact. So, but I would encourage members of General Committee not to support 1 and 2. And I just want to mention a few reasons why I had that position at City Building as well. I mean, our staff have expressed their concerns in the memo. We've received the correspondence today from the mayor of Bradford. But just on the issues that are in front of us, you know, paragraph 1, it isn't an opposition to the generation of GHGs due to building a highway. It's a request to shift a project into a different process to a level of government that's already made a decision on this. So I see it as a little bit of tilting at windmills at this point. And I think the premise of doing it is a little bit questionable. I think, you know, the notion that because we get it to the federal level, perhaps GHGs will be better considered because the belief is either that government is more inclined to do that or the process would more carefully consider it. I can tell you that the Ontario environmental assessment process requires that calculation of the GHG impact. I can also guarantee that given the attention that will be paid to this EA, there will be a very fulsome and very public, I would anticipate, discussion around those impacts. You know, I think the premise is correct. What happens when you build a highway to replace a congested corridor, yes, you reduce the number of idling vehicles, but the induced demand, which is basically you create more capacity so more people drive, that's real. And that is why highways increase GHGs, and we shouldn't kid ourselves that that's the case. The reality in this corridor, though, is currently we have you know, it's always a little more complex than the simplified messages that sort of come out in dialogue. There's 23 traffic lights right now in this corridor. All of the growth that is occurring in Simcoe County that has to travel this route right now goes right through the middle of downtown Bradford. And as a consequence, Bradford is not able to achieve its own goals for active transportation, a better pedestrian realm in its downtown, and it is seeing, of course, the economic impacts as well of congestion, which is growing quickly because Bradford is growing quickly. So, you know, I would say, you know, there's always a few more aspects to the discussion, but this motion in particular is asking, you know, the federal government to conduct an assessment that really doesn't differ all that much from the provincial assessment. I think the reason this was suggested in the first place is because there's some belief that the governments might reach different conclusions based on the information that would be generated by whatever expert team conducts the assessment. So I think given the federal government's already made their decision on number one, it's not really appropriate for us as the City of Barrie to be asking them to reconsider that decision. I believe we have heard from our staff and we have had confirmation that number two is already happening. I mean, I think if we ask for it, the answer would be yes, that will be done. But, you know, I don't have a particular objection to it, although I think it is going to be seen as a little objectionable that the City of Barrie is asking for it. I'm certainly supportive of paragraph 3, and I supported it at City Building Committee because I do think the Lake Simcoe Protection Act is something that all of us as area municipalities should be very conscious of, and I don't think it's a bad idea to ask for that comprehensive assessment, given that a small section of this highway does travel through particularly significant lands. So I'm going to, Councillor Kungle's already asked that we vote on the paragraph separately, and personally I'll be voting against the first two paragraphs in favor of the third paragraph. The fourth one relates to who the resolution is sent to. And I guess what I would do is if there is a change to 1, 2, and 3, depending on the outcome, maybe I'll just take an amendment from somebody to amend paragraph 4 if that's needed. So at this point, I'd like to call the question, unless there's any other questions or comments. Okay, so we'll vote on each paragraph separately. On paragraph 1 of the motion, those in favor, please indicate. And opposed? Okay, paragraph 1 is defeated. Paragraph 2, those in favor. 4, opposed. 6, that is defeated. Paragraph 3, those in favor. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, opposed. 3, that carries. And I guess now would be appropriate for an amendment that to paragraph 4 that would take out the federal departments and ministers that are mentioned in the motion. Would somebody care to move that, I guess, just for procedure? Okay, thanks, Councillor Elwin. So the amendment to paragraph 4, first of all, so that's just to delete the federal departments and minister. Any comments or questions on that? Okay, seeing none, those in favor of just that amendment to the paragraph? Okay, that carries. And on paragraph 4 itself as amended, those in favor? Okay, any opposed? 2. Okay, that does carry. Okay, so for those following this issue, the city general committee has approved a revised motion that will call for a comprehensive impact assessment on Lake Simcoe for this project and those vulnerable watersheds and inflows into Lake Simcoe, but has chosen not to proceed with the first 2 paragraphs regarding the environmental assessment process. Thank you, members of the general committee. We will move on to the next item that was held. So getting into the staff reports now, and the first item that was held was the City of Barrie's Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan. It was held by Councillor Kungle. Go ahead, Councillor Kungle.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. And I'm holding it because, you know, we've been hearing about the plan for some time and there's been extensive work. So first and foremost, I wanted to compliment all those involved on the committee and all partners. So just exceptional work. Thank you very much for bringing it forward. We had the opportunity at the joint town hall for wards 3, 4, and 5 to hear from members of the police service around the aspects of that plan and tying it into anti-discrimination and our anti-racism task force and all the components and activities. So really excited to start to see this rolling out. And I held it only because more to kind of say thank you and well done. It's a great resource and asset that I think will serve us well, especially I believe as Mayor Lehman noted in the first page of that report around supporting the work of our health accord. But in complement to what we're seeing around community safety and wellbeing plans across Simcoe County, we had a recent meeting of the Simcoe County Human Services Committee. And at that time, we took a moment to actually do a report on the It Starts campaign. And while that was a brilliant campaign and lots of ambassadors showed up for that, there was some great commentary too around making sure it's not just a one-week campaign, but we continue that work. And so I wanted to take an opportunity to kind of just highlight and maybe it's a question that I can redirect to Councillor Natalie Harris tied to that committee. But on the Simcoe County website, the It Starts campaign developed this really brilliant resource hub, almost like a diversity hub. And it's got resources from how to challenge stereotypes, combat racism, committing to equity, recognizing microaggressions, a brilliant repository. And so I wasn't sure if that's something, you know, at minimum was being leveraged in some way, be it maybe a link on all of our Health Accord partners' websites to be able to support the navigation to this resource, because sometimes some of those beautiful resource portals are only highlighted or you're only kind of navigating there during a campaign or a particular event, but would love to see this actually be a direct link on the City of Barrie's website, but maybe also considered or proposed to be something, if it's not there, on all 5 of our Health Accord partners, including Barrie Police.
Sorry about that. Thanks, Councillor Kungle. And I'm sure our staff in implementing this can look at linking that up. I would agree it's a great resource. Councillor Natalie Harris, did I see your hand?
Having the difficulties as well. No, I just wanted to further say that for sure that program will really dovetail well with the Barrie Inclusion Network, so we can work together to connect the leads of those programs and really work together to make it even better than it is.
Thanks, Councillor Harris.
And sorry, Mayor Lehman, may I just say one thing too about this report really quickly?
Please, go ahead.
Awesome. So I'm just going to get my thing here. So I just thought it was really important to, because this was a massive undertaking to have this developed, I really want to just take the time to say thank you to the action partners and other individuals that were part of this huge plan. So I definitely want to thank the Barrie Association of Volunteer Administrators, Barrie Native Friendship Center, Barrie Police Service, Barrie Probation and Parole Services, Barrie Public Library, Canadian Mental Health Association, Simcoe County, City of Barrie, City of Simcoe, Downtown Barrie Business Association, Georgian College, RVH, Salvation Army, Barrie Bayside Mission Center, Simcoe County Alliance to End Homelessness, Simcoe Muskoka District Health Unit, Women and Children's Shelter of Barrie, and special thank yous for sure to Barrie Police Chief Greenwood. She was definitely the lead in this plan, and also to Staff Sergeant and Operational Services Administration and Operations, such a long title, Val, but for Val Gates as well. She really was a huge part of this project, as well as Fire Chief Corey Mainprize, and Alex Way, who is a consultant and managing director with Mass LBP. And Councillor Gary Harvey was part of this committee, and he had a lot of great feedback as well. And our clerk, Wendy Cook, amazing. Oh my goodness, she's so good at corralling all of the information that comes her way and disseminating it. So thank you so much to everyone. I'm really excited about this plan. CBC Radio is going to do a quick little interview tomorrow morning about it as well. And I hope that we can really shine a light on how wonderful Barrie's plan is. All municipalities are mandated to putting it forward. And I think we have a pretty good one here that we can maybe use as a model. So, but I guess I'm biased. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Harris. Councillor Gary Harvey.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, I just wanted to add to Councillor Harris's comments as a member of the committee, because it was an interesting process, because it was a different process that nobody had ever embarked on before, because all the municipalities were forced to create this new plan from scratch. And there was a time at the beginning where it almost didn't seem like we were really making headway, and then all of a sudden we went from walking to running, and never in my wildest dreams did I think it would be an 86-page plan at the end. I would have figured maybe a 20-page plan at most. And so it just goes to show you how fulsome it ended up becoming, especially when we expanded beyond just the community resources in the committee and expanded throughout the community to get a broader perspective of what was required for our community. But yes, kudos go out to Chief Greenwood, Staff Gates, and Chief Mainprize for their leadership in really taking the bull by the horns and getting us from that walking stage to running and finally to this complete document.
Thanks, Councillor Harvey. Councillor Natalie Harris.
Sorry, one more thing I forgot to mention. Thank you to the community, the actual community who answered surveys and really provided the feedback that we needed to make these actions and the plans. And that wouldn't have happened without you. So we did the work behind the scenes, and but it really, because you took the time to answer the surveys, is why it is so successful. So thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Harris. Any other comments on the matter? I believe it's on the floor, Councillor Kungl, as printed. Okay, I just wanted to add my thanks, first of all, to you, Councillor Harvey and Councillor Harris, for sitting on the committee, but especially to those who did the heavy lifting, our chiefs, their staff, certainly Staff Gates. The value, I think, there's a lot of value in the whole document. I really encourage people to read it, because as you read it, you get such a sense of the shift in approach to community well-being and to public safety that it represents. It is that move upstream in many cases to try and start addressing root causes. But even where it's talking about delivering reactionary services or reactive services, response services, it's about delivering them differently. And it's a conversation that has come from a number of different angles over the past couple of years. It's something our community expects. It's something we have tried to lead on in some areas, but what this plan really does is start to pull a whole community together behind that approach. And I would direct people specifically, if you're only going to read one part of the plan, read the 15 action items. They happen to be in the staff report as well. They're paragraph 24 of the staff report. But just to mention a few, they do mention the health accord, and I put the health accord together as a framework really to help implement a plan like this. It was a way to get 5 big partners together to help deliver these kinds of priorities. But if we highlight a few other things, action item 4 is around a community justice center in Barrie. And for those who aren't familiar, with the Justice Center pilot project that Attorney General Downey, MPP Downey, is leading. They are a very, very innovative approach. It's very successful right now. There's one in Red Hook, New York, that is widely considered an example of alternative to the traditional court system. It gives people an opportunity to address the reasons why they've come into conflict with the justice system and to move on to a new path without incarceration. And to have a Justice Center here in Barrie would be a great step forward, I think. We have the multi-service campus, long been a dream here in Barrie, but that dream has some new life with the commitment of some key leadership in the community from CMHA and others. The action item 6, that CMHA, the county and the city, or at least the police service, will work together to increase access to mental health services. We know this is so badly needed, never more now than coming out of COVID. And what that looks like and how we do it together is going to be very, very important. And just other one that I wanted to, there's others very good ones here, the Anti-Racism Task Force, the Inclusion Network, and the Anti-Opioid Strategy. But I also wanted to mention action item 11, which is that the Women and Children's Shelter, the Barrie Public Library and partners will expand training about how to provide trauma-informed services. This is so important across what we do as emergency services. Anybody who is involved with any of the 3 emergency services right now will tell you that this is critical to good victim support. It is particularly critical with youth crime or with crimes against children, crimes, sexual crimes, and more broadly, it is critically important in terms of helping people with addictions as well. So that is a very, very welcome step, and I think it's one of those moving upstream in terms of the root causes of some of our challenges, but also how you can respond more compassionately and with a real understanding of what victims go through. So there's so much good work in here. And I think the challenge with any plan always is keeping it off the shelf and in the budget and in the programs and in the thinking as to how we design our services. And so action item number 1, in some ways, which is the one that people might easily ignore, which says let's do an annual forum. Actually, that's critically important because that's what's going to keep the implementation on the front burner. That's going to keep it in people's minds. And while there are many people in our community who now I think are increasingly holding all of us accountable in local government, whether it's the police or the city or the county, to our plans, having an annual forum where we can work together to deliver these recommendations, I think is what will keep this from collecting dust on a shelf and keep it hopefully in the forefront of our thinking and our actions. So again, thank you to the whole team. It's a great plan. It's something we can be proud of. So you probably will guess I'm going to support it. And if there are no other comments, I will call the question on it. It's on the floor as printed. Those in favor of the plan, of the motion. Any opposed? None? That carries unanimously. Thanks again to everybody for their work. The next item that was held is with regards to the downtown BIA's levy. It was held by Councillor Ripma. Councillor Ripma.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'll put it on the floor as printed. I have a couple of questions, and maybe Mr. Miller can help us out, and maybe Councillor Morales and Harris might also be able to shed some light on some of these things. And I'm not sure whether I have an amendment or not. And the first question is, we have 6 items in the budget, and I'm just wondering, is there any, have we been provided, or does anybody know any, like what are these made up of? Do we have any line items, especially on the bigger ones?
Mr. Miller, want to take a crack at that?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to members of General Committee. So we don't have a lot of additional background. There was some spreadsheets provided to us, but not a lot. Most of it's rolled up into the larger categories. While I'll say this is a bit of a different format than we've received in the past, it's not completely. We haven't always been given tons of information, so it's again, is different from the past, and we're probably going forward ask them to provide a little bit more, but I don't have too much more to share.
Okay. And I suppose, I mean, you do give us the total compared to last year, but in each of the categories, we don't have a comparison for last year either, I assume. Is that correct?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to members of General Committee. So again, I can provide similar categories that they provided us last year to show you what they gave us and what that difference looks like, if that's what you're asking. We can certainly show you, even going back a few years, what their budget was and what they provided before, if you wish.
Okay, all right, that would be useful. And do we have any sort of actual figures from last year in terms of, first of all, the budget, and then secondly, what the actual amounts were that were spent?
So through you, Mayor Lehman, to members of committee. So the BIA's financial statements do get consolidated with the city's audited financial statements. So if you wish to see a copy of their financial statements from far back as you'd like, we can provide that to you, and that shows you what the actuals were and where they spent them.
Okay, is that available for last year?
2021, I don't believe their board has finalized the statements, but I think they are close.
Okay. Now I'm wrestling with how to come to grips with this a little bit, but in your report, you say that you know, we have an agreement with the BIA that they would pay their a certain amount for Meridian Square over a period of 10 years. And that works out to be about $150,000. And last year, we did not ask for that payment. We deferred that. And it seems to me that this year, that's also not in their budget. So I'm just wondering if my assessment is correct in that. And following up on that is, are we running the risk of running into a problem in coming years where, you know, instead of paying whatever the number is over 10 years, they're now going to need to pay it over 7 or 8 years. So that's going to, you know, impact the board, and it's certainly going to impact the rate. Is my assessment correct on that? And I guess where I'm heading with that is I realize that by legislation, we cannot increase the levy. So I'm kind of wrestling with how best do we deal with it. One thought I was having was that we might just do an amendment and ask them to include $150,000 in their budget for this. But I don't want to kind of really do that. I mean, is there a way that we can somehow have that discussion with the board? Because it seems to me that, you know, we either have that discussion now, or, you know, we run the risk of having a much bigger discussion in a year or two. So that was a long-winded question. I'm sorry, Mr. Miller.
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to members of General Committee. So I would draw your attention to paragraph 12 in the staff report. So the agreement the city signed with the BIA in regards to the Meridian indicated, so there was a commitment to fundraising. So the portion we're speaking about is the levy portion that was to be levied on the BIA. The agreement indicated that payment was required 10 years after substantial completion of Meridian Square. So the agreement did not indicate annual payments. It was pretty vague. So last year would have been the first year after substantial completion that a payment would have been required, and council waived that payment. So to answer your question, obviously the longer you go out with a loan, the higher the risk if you're not getting any of it paid back. So if you were to do the math and take the total 1.5 million and divide it by 10, that would be the 151,000. And I'll just emphasize, it doesn't say in the agreement that the BAA is required to pay a minimum amount each year. It just says over 10 years they have to pay it back.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. And I agree that that's the situation. And we have put that payment off last year, and that's, understandable. And did the BIA come to us and ask, would you put it off another year or renegotiate the terms? Or are they just assuming that they're not going to pay this year either? Have we had any discussions with the board about that?
So I'll go to Mr. Miller first, and then I'll ask the board reps on council. Mr. Miller?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to members of General Committee. In finance, we do meet with the with Kelly and the I believe they're chair of their finance committee, and they had indicated that for this year they're not including it in the budget. They had indicated they got a legal opinion that basically said they didn't have to include it in their budget, but the city could levy it on their own if the city so chooses.
Councillor Morales?
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. Thank you, Councillor Rietma. So let's address the Meridian one. That's an important one. That's a huge multi-million-dollar capital building committed by previous boards before you and I, were on council, and obviously it needs to be honored properly. So here's where we're at. The board passed the motion to get a legal opinion, as Mr. Miller said, about how to pay back the city that promise of payment of money. What the legal opinion that we got, that the BIA board got back, was saying that it is appropriate to create a separate levy to make that, to essentially pay that money. And I need to delve into the details. I can't just leave it at that level. So essentially, it is the city of Barrie, the corporation, that imposes this levy on property owners and collects that money. And so as it stands right now, this is what you would get, Councillor Reitman and members of council. What you would get is the city of Barrie would act as tax man, would get the money, get the levy, then would give it to the BIA. Here's your money, give us your budget, here's your money to do your operations. And then the BIA would essentially take that, about roughly 150, let's call it, and would say, oh, here's 150 back. There's a very inefficient and unnecessary step in collections. And as you have said, as many have said, about proper accounting, simplification of governance, it's an unnecessary one. And so what the BIA opinion got is that it is appropriate to get a separate levy that just addresses that project. So just the way, for example, that we have the infrastructure renewal fund, that is, it's still included, but it's kind of separate, and it's acknowledged as to why. We're kind of following that same logic that City Council has followed with infrastructure renewal fund. In this instance, the other, not only to divide it properly, but also to reduce that, where the city gives the BIA a big pot of money and then they return a little bit of it. We want the board, the intention of the board is to simplify that and have two separate ones. Now, it is not to grow necessarily the percentage. It might be to split the percentage. I'm going to give you very figurative numbers. So if the number right now is 12%, it is not necessary to take the 12% and add, I don't know, 1%, 2%, 0.8% to fund the levy. That is not the case. The commitment remains that was made years ago. So it essentially would be to take that 12, and again, I am making up numbers, and it is, let's say, 10% plus 2. So 10 would remain in operations, and that 2% would get reallocated to a separate levy. Maybe it's 2, maybe it's less, but you get the example. So the reason it was not included in the budget is that the BIA was in the process of retaining that legal advice, and now is in the process of fine-tuning that with Mr. Miller and City Hall. But the BIA is more than committed to paying its committed share of that infrastructure project. It has been very successful and wants to preserve and grow that partnership.
Mr. Mayor, just following up on that, I mean, I certainly have no doubt that the board intends to pay. I guess this is the first time that I've heard about a new levy that we as the city are going to impose on the BIA. And I guess that I guess I'd like to, maybe we should hear from Mr. Miller whether that's possible. And we probably need some advice from our solicitor on that at some point. I guess the thing that I'm concerned about is Mr. Miller and I guess staff actually is going to give us a report in June. But if we have to do something about the board's budget, we have to sort of pass it before that. So we can't wait till June. So this is kind of gives us a bit of a, puts us in no man's land. And I'm reluctant actually to bring forward an amendment on this, but it all seems very sort of vague and up in the air. Mr. Miller, can you help us out on that?
Mr. Miller.
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to members of General Committee. So just backing up a bit in terms of what is the BIA's levy. So if council approves the budget as proposed, so in the staff report, it's $561,000. We then take that $561,000 and convert it into a tax rate, which then works out to the 0.334%. So then all properties within the BIA boundary get that additional tax that they pay. So if the BIA stands, from what they've communicated with staff, at least the member that I've spoken to, is that they believe that the city can levy on top of the BIA's budget the capital contribution. So, for example, instead of being 561,000, if council were to decide that we weren't increasing the BIA's budget, but we were going to levy an additional 154,000, which is in alternative 3 in the report, it's basically increasing. We'd be taxing them 561,000 plus 154. So there would be one levy, and they'd be charged more, and then the city would withhold back the 151 capital. In the past, it's generally been more, the expectation, I would say, was that the BIA would include that in their budget. Council would approve the full amount, so everyone knew exactly what was being levied about. In terms of separating it into two levy, it doesn't separate. It's one levy, if you understand what I'm saying there.
Mr. Mayor, can I then ask Councillor Morales or Councillor Harris a question? I think I heard Councillor Morales say that the board was quite comfortable with having two levies. One, the one that they've requested, and the other one for the payment of the 150,000. And now Mr. Miller basically says, well, you could call it two levies, but it'll really come out to be one. Where's the BIA on that? Because I think, these people are, they're hardworking and we really are in their corner. But what's the BIA really saying? Are they saying we want to push this off for another year, or are they saying we're quite okay to pay it? Just do it in, just add it to our budget. And I'm not quite sure that the Municipal Act lets us actually do that. But maybe the council representatives could help us with that.
Sure, we'll go to Councillor Jim Harris this time first, and then we'll go back to Councillor Morales to add anything.
Sorry, thanks, Mayor Lehman. Yeah, my understanding is, as Councillor Morales had already suggested, so I will defer to him to explain further. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. So, Councillor Rima, thank you for the feedback. In essence, however the accounting powers that be at City Hall collect the money, the goal that the downtown BIA has is that they essentially, that money that they owe is taken off the top before they get their payments. So once again, the goal is to prevent this scenario from happening. They get a pot of money and then they write another check or whatever wire and give it back to the city, and that extra step. So whether it's a separate levy of collection, again, like my example, the 12 plus the 2. So the number 12 really doesn't change. The number, I have a helicopter going over my house. My apologies. So instead of it being the 12, it would be the 10 plus 2. So that's the logic. If Mr. Miller is telling us that at the end of the day, call it what you will, but it's the one fee that gets collected, the goal is to have that meeting with Mr. Miller and downtown BIA staff that essentially the money doesn't jump from the BIA account and back to the city. So that is the ultimate goal. Thank you for, I appreciate Mr. Miller's clarification. So let me just redefine the thesis statement here. The goal is to make sure that whatever money the BIA is owed, the city of Barrie claws it back from the monies they collect from property taxpayers, and it doesn't have to jump the account twice. That's the ultimate goal. So whatever proper accounting, I'm not a CPA, whatever proper accounting process needs to be done, I will leave it to the experts, but that is the overall goal. As for your budget questions, I didn't want to not address those, Councillor Rietma. That said, the mayor did just give me a chance to go to this. So if you would like to ask me some of the questions about budget clarifications from earlier, I'm happy to do so. But I hope that clarified on what the intent is.
Okay, I very much appreciate the clarification. And so I'm wondering, Mr. Mayor, if the proper route would be that we ask Mr. Miller to give us a memo at council for next council meeting, so that, and that happens in 2 weeks, so he has some time to have some discussions with the BIA, and that whatever comes before council, I'm quite prepared to support this budget, but whatever comes before council has the payment for Meridian included in it, and whether that is 2 levies or 1 levy, so be it. I understand what Councilor Morales is saying, that we don't want to be passing checks back and forth, which is kind of a waste of time. But it seems to me that the city puts out the levy and then collects that money and then sends that money to the BIA. And I suppose, and maybe Mr. Miller can clarify that in his memo, that if the city actually collects, the full levy, and then we just send everything to the BIA less the 150,000 that is earmarked for Meridian, then that's fine. Is that a reasonable approach? I see Councilor Morales nodding that.
Yeah, just procedurally, Councillor Rietma, a couple of things. Yeah, there's time sensitivity to this motion because the matter's coming in front of General Committee quite late in the year. It's already mid-May and tax bills need to go out, unfortunately. Yeah. So this is actually going to go to the special council meeting next Tuesday, the 25th. But that still does give 4 or 5 business days for staff to at least clarify some of these issues for us, perhaps by memo. But I would just note that any slowdown to the process, unfortunately, is going to slow up the billing process.
Mr. Mayor, it's not my intention to interfere with this process at all. I just wanted to be clear, and I think, in my mind, I think Councilor Morales has clarified where we are, and I think we just need to make sure that the paperwork says what we all intend. So thank you for that. And yes, it may be a bit of a short turnaround for Mr. Miller for next Tuesday, but let's see what we can do.
Okay, so just suggesting we formalize the direction for additional information, Councilor Rima, perhaps you could move an amendment to add a paragraph 4 that requests a memo from staff regarding options to include a Meridian Place payment within the BIA's budget in consultation with the BIA staff. Something like that.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll move exactly those words.
Okay. How about that? There's an amendment on the floor. Discussion on the amendment. Anyone want to clarify or want any clarification or discussion on that amendment? Okay, seeing, two. Yes, Councillor Jim Harris and then Councillor Gary Harvey.
Yeah, thank you. Just a quick question to Mr. Miller, to you, Mayor Lehman. In alternative 3 in the report provided by staff, it did talk about the Meridian payment, and that it would be included in a report coming back to council in June. And that would that have included the method and arrangement around payments that Councillor Reitman is seeking, which I appreciate why he's seeking it.
Mr. Miller.
Through you, Mayor Lehman. Yeah, the intent was to kind of do a full answer all your questions and as quickly as we can related to the BIA. As the question that I need to look into or want to answer from a legal perspective, because the Municipal Act's quite vague on it, is can a municipality arbitrarily levy, let's call it the capital charge, without the BAA's approval in the budget? So the intent was we would answer that with other questions that councils had in the June's memo. The challenge there is if that would sort of handicap council for this year, because if you decided at that point in time you wanted to go ahead with levying the budget, it wouldn't actually happen until the 2022 tax year. So that would be the downside of the June report.
Okay, thank you very much for that.
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a question for Mr. Miller to kind of get a little better overview of this, because this special surcharge is being proposed for this year is very moderately increased compared to last year, to the tune of only an additional $5,000 and change. But when it comes to the big picture of the amount of capital commitments that the BIA has already committed to, we got the streetscapes that is included in this too, which is another $3 million that they've committed to. So globally, how do we foresee that we're actually going to see these payments to cover all of this by the deadlines that are set? Now, I know the terms of the initial agreement for Meridian is very broad, that literally they could sit back and wait until that 10th year to make one massive payment, which I highly suspect is not going to be the case. But I guess I'm just concerned about how are we going to see our funds?
Yep, Councillor Harris. Jim Harris.
Apologies, I just wanted to note it wasn't 3 million. I think Councillor Harvey may have misspoke. It's 300,000 as it relates to Dunlop. Sorry, I just wanted to correct that. People were wondering, falling off their chairs with that number. So thank you.
That's correct. Okay, sorry. Next, I think I saw Councillor Congle.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Quick question, I'm hoping, is to Mr. Miller. Is it common practice, or would it be appropriate within scope about asking for at least a rough forecasted repayment plan? So obviously there's some intention now with a certain percentage set. So it'd be interesting to know, I'd be interested to know like how that was informed and how that tracks, because as you say, and it would be great to have that clarification about the Municipal Act, should there be changes in future boards or in discretion of percentage around a levy that then would repay the loan owing. Should council in the future find itself in a position to then need to implement a levy at our discretion to be able to recover funds if there's any gap, it would be great to know that, but I'd be keen to also see what the thinking is around the plan and projection. Would be great to understand that the BAA is what they're planning in the out years. Would that be, so I guess to clarify, would that be something for the June meeting, or could that be something that comes back by next week? I'm hoping at minimum it's the June meeting.
Through you, Mayor Lehman, certainly we would ask the BIA whether they can provide that by next week. I can't speak for them, but these comprehensive type questions is certainly what I think staff had in mind of the June report that we're hoping to have a little time to do our homework on, but we will ask the question for next week.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Elwin.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. I have a question for Mr. Miller. From my short time on the board, I do recall conversations around the Meridian Street payment being budgeted in previous years, sort of as a fiscal management plan so that it wasn't a shock to the budget. So to be clear, has the BIA in past years ever budgeted for a payment for Meridian Place or no?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to members of General Committee, yes, I believe in past year there was a line item that had capital contribution to Meridian, but each year they used up, I guess, or spent the money in different ways as per the board's direction.
Okay, and so I imagine the consolidated financial statements that you mentioned earlier would show how that money was spent?
So through you, Mayor Lehman, it'll show the categories that it was spent into. The financial statements of the BIA does have a note in it that calls out the commitment that they have with the city in regards to Meridian and now the streetscape.
Okay, so that's interesting that it was budgeted for and then spent on other things. And I am having a little bit of a hard time following the position of the board on the payment. I find it a little odd, and maybe I'm misunderstanding, that there was a legal opinion sought to avoid one transaction or writing one check. It just doesn't seem to make sense to me. And I would be interested in having a more fulsome explanation of exactly what the board's looking for. Like, if the board is wanting to waive the payment for this year again, I'm open to having that conversation, but I would like to see a formal request if that's the case. I'm just kind of unclear on, why the legal opinion was sought and what the actual intention of the board as a whole is. So perhaps we would like to see some correspondence from the board to that effect, sort of clarifying their position.
Good, thanks, Councillor Owen. Are there others who wish to comment? We are on the amendment, which was to ask for the memo of Mr. Miller. Councillor McCann, were you asking to speak? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. I'll be really quick here. This has a question for Mr. Miller. Is it not the understanding that when council tells the BA to pay the money back, that they're going to pay the money back? You just have to give them an outline?
Mr. Miller.
Through you, Mayor Lehman. So the Municipal Act says that council can approve the BIA's budget. You cannot increase it, you can lower it, you can approve it in part, I think is the wording of it. So that's the direction that we have under the council has under the Municipal Act. So what's being debated is can we levy the BIA above and beyond their budget that they've brought forward to.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just maybe throw a comment out, and I'd like to hopefully move this along. It is almost 8:45. It is COVID. We have gated up Meridian Place for obvious reasons, and I think giving some breathing room and maybe having, a partnership discussion in June would be prudent and just give some breathing room in 2021. Those are my 2 cents. Thank you.
Okay, folks, we are technically on the amendment to ask for a memo before finalizing this decision next week. Is there any further comment on the amendment to ask for options for how to include the payment from Mr. Miller? Councillor Elwin?
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. Just one quick question for Mr. Miller. I'm not sure if this has been said or I missed it, but so is there a formal legal agreement between the city and the BIA for this route payment? It's a formal contract?
Mr. Miller.
Through you, Mayor Lehman, yes, there was an agreement that was agreed to by council and the BIA. I can't remember the exact year. I think 2014, I believe, or 15, around that time.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, on the amendment, Councillor Thompson on the amendment.
Further to, through you, Mayor Lehman, further to Councillor Elwin's question to Mr. Miller, did I hear you correctly though, saying the legal agreement that it would be paid back at 10 years, but with no schedule? So the legal agreement would actually, they could pay it all in the 10th year. Is that correct?
Yes, through you, Mayor Lehman, that's correct.
So technically, by not paying it or not budgeting for it, they're not in breach of contract.
I'm not a lawyer, but we've interpreted that.
Perfect. Thanks. Thanks for the clarity.
Thanks, Councillor Thompson. Okay, on the amendment to add a paragraph 4 to get the memo from Mr. Miller by next Tuesday. Any further comments or questions? Okay, seeing none, those in favor of the amendment, please indicate. Any opposed? None. The amendment carries. Okay, on the main motion as amended, any further comment? Councillor Morales.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. Good questions. I appreciate the questions from members of General Committee on this one. Councillor, you asked some really good questions earlier, so I'm speaking on the whole motion as amended, so it would be appropriate to discuss it now. The reality is a lot of members of council over time and members of the public have said, we want the BIA to, get their administrative policies in order, get governance, that buzzword that has become a buzzword, and bring things up to speed. The reality is the city of Barrie, just like all of our wards, just like everything, has grown a lot. And same thing with the BIA. The BIA in the past years before any of us were on council functioned with good intention, but it functioned just the way an ag hall would function in a small town. People would meet, they would discuss, they would make decisions, they'd go forward. The reality is we're now an urban city. We are so well respected. Our mayor keeps getting elected to leadership roles around the province, and with that becomes higher standards for our organizations, and we deserve to have those. And what that means is Barrison, for example, I know a couple of you guys have emailed, where are you in terms of government? Barrison's done. Like, they're done with the governments. It's getting adopted at the next BIA meeting, and then it needs to be sent to the AGM, at which point it comes to general committee and then council. It takes that long-winded path. What's up with the next AGM? In the past, AGMs haven't been held every year necessarily. This is not a BIA thing lately. This has been a historical thing. So we're waiting to clean that up. And what I mean by that is, do we hold a virtual AGM? How do we increase turnout? Are we going to have an in-person AGM because the federal government, Health Canada, can all of a sudden say, you're good to go as long as you show your vaccine card at the door? It takes time to organize halls or Zoom meetings of that magnitude. So we are in a wait and see approach. I love the questions about the payments, Councillor Rima, Councillor Harvey, everybody else. Again, that money needs to be paid, and we want to do it properly. As well as Councillor Rima, I think you touched base on the budgets. Where's the budgets? Can you show us a better breakdown? The reality is, I'm just checking here my notes. The budget has never been posted publicly, I believe, ever for the BIA, not just a 2018, 2019 thing, ever. Should that be the case? Not necessarily, but guess what? The great governance report that Barriston did covers that. And the BIA has never been, I shouldn't say never, but to my recollection, hasn't been invited to do a presentation the way the Barrie Library has done it with their budgets and the way the Barrie Police Board does with their budgets. So guess what? I know for a fact that our the executive director is more than enthusiastic to be on that invitee list for, well, obviously in June she's presenting, but for next year as well. And then that said, no member of council, not just existing, but past members of council, anybody could have just put up their hand and say, hey, why isn't the BIA presenting to us every year for budgets? But nobody did, myself included, and past councils. But we've all learned these lessons through, again, bringing up the BIA to a big city standard, and also through the governance review Barrison has done. So these are all great questions. I do want to give a great shout out to yourself, Councillor Rima, for meeting with our executive director this morning. You know, we can have you're able to get more wholesome answers than just kind of the one back and forth in a council setting. So I do encourage any members of council, even though that memo is coming, if we adopt this after I'm eventually done speaking, if you have any clarity or really in-depth questions, please feel free to reach out to the executive director. She's more than happy to answer these questions. I don't want anyone sitting here going, you know what, I have doubts that maybe that $300,000 isn't going to get paid, or I have doubts about how we're doing the financing. Nobody should have doubts. And while this is on a little bit of a time crunch, this is growing pains of our organization that should have grown with the city it represents, and now have a really good opportunity to do so.
Thanks, Councillor Morales. Any other comments on the motion as amended? Yeah, the general comment I did want to make is, you know, if the BIA board had come to the city and said, could you please forgive for 21, which forgave for 20, and even if they said push the 10-year timeline by 2 years because of the impact of COVID, I would have supported that. I think the problem we've got right now is there's a lot of uncertainty. You know, I've spoken to a couple of members of the board as well, spoken to the executive director to try and understand actually what we're being told right now. I believe everybody says or agrees that the commitment is there. The commitment to the amount of money is not in question. And that was the premise under which Barrie City Council voted in the previous council to undertake the project. I mean, we did it because we were only having to contribute 1/3 of the cost, and the other 2/3 was coming from fundraising and the benefiting property owners. You know, I don't think that's in question. I think what's been unfortunate is the communication doesn't seem to be too clear right now on exactly what's being requested or what the board wishes to change. And I know there was difficulty with getting quorum last month as well due to the recent changes. So we'll look for some clarity before the 25th. We are out of time. If the, you know, I think everybody is wanting to finalize things and move forward. But I would share the view that if we need to delay the contribution this year, that's entirely understandable. However, the commitment must be honored, and the commitment to the full amount must be honored. And it's a how, not a whether that happens. So with that, I'll support the motion that's on the floor, and I'll call the question on it. Those in favor of the motion as amended? Anybody opposed? None? That's unanimous. Okay, thanks for the discussion. We do have several more items that were held. We're at 5 to 9. Why don't we proceed for now? We might take a break if we start getting into a fourth hour. The water and wastewater system financial plans is the next item that was held. Deputy Mayor Ward, I think you held this for the presentation.
I will put it on the floor. My questions were answered during the presentation.
Great. So the item is on the floor as printed. Comments or questions from members of council on the plans? Okay, seeing none, this one might be quick. I will call the question. Those in favor of the item, it's on the floor as printed. Any opposed? None? That carries. And thank you again to Mr. Scanlon and team for the presentation. That means we can move on now to the next item that was held, which is the Ontario Community Building Fund SADLON Arena. However, it's Councillor Harvey's item. I see he's just stepped away from his camera for a moment. And I'm reluctant to proceed without him. So
why don't we skip to the next one?
I was just about to say, with the permission of members of General Committee, why don't we move to the next item, which is the outdoor activity restrictions item. It was put on by Councillor McCann and held by Councillor McCann. Go ahead, Councillor McCann.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman, and I'd like to put the on the floor printed, and I do have an amendment. And I think that Wendy has circulated this to all your emails. Would you like me to read it?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. that in the best interests of residential physical and mental health, should the province not act to open outdoor physical amenities, that staff and legislative court services department investigate the feasibility of allowing outdoor spaces in Barrie, including tennis courts, pickleball courts, sports fields, basketball courts, and golf courses, and report back by memorandum by the next city council meeting on May 31st.
Okay, thank you. We have an amendment without some of the words, just a few words that were removed there. It was as read there by Councillor McCann. Comments, sorry, Councillor McCann, did you want to introduce that? Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Lehman. I don't think that this is going to need a heavy debate. I just think that, you know, we're an obedient country, we're an obedient province, and we're an obedient city. And quite frankly, I think that the province and Premier Ford is not listening to his own experts. And I really believe that Premier Ford is really trying to minimize his risk at the cost to ourselves, right? And we look at obesity, we look at weight gain, we look at mental and physical health. And I don't believe that those have been factored in, and we're only looking at COVID-19. So that is not new information to anybody. There's a lot of mayors, Mayor Brampton, Patrick Brown, Toronto, Mississauga, Crombie, Ottawa, I mean, have all been shouting this out and screaming this out. And I just wanted the city of Barrie to have their part, because I believe that this is an important issue. I look at Centennial Park this weekend and saw, you know, 2 kids with their kites out there. And I'm like, yeah, they can be fined. And that's just ridiculous. It's beyond ridiculous. So I'm asking this council to support me in this. It may be a small pebble in the ocean, but I think it's a momentum that we need to move forward, and we need Ontario to hear our voice. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. On the amendment, members of General Committee. Councillor Congo.
Through your worship to staff. So I'm just looking at the language in the amendment by Councillor McCann that does note golf courses. And I was wondering if staff could clarify if there's anything that differentiates the scope there, because I'm reading it as what city facilities and what we might have more of potential autonomy to control versus golf courts. Is there a difference there? Because I'm assuming golf courts being privately owned, would that fall out of potential scope?
Ms. McAlpine.
Mayor Lehman, through you to members of council, provincial legislation would override whether it was privately held lands or publicly held lands. It would just be who would be compliant, whether it would be the private property owner or the municipality, but the individuals present would be the ones who would be impacted.
So in follow-up, if I can clarify, while I'm all for, you know, how do we support physical activity and well-being during the pandemic, and I appreciate what Councillor McCann is putting forward, I'm just looking at the language around staff investigating feasibility of allowing outdoor spaces. So is this more of a potential statement to the provincial government about the call for action to move in this direction so we can operate in compliance with the provincial order? Or is there any possibility, just to be clear about what we're asking staff to do, would we be working in non-compliance and at risk?
Ms. McAlpine.
Mayor Lehman, through you to Councillor Kungle, staff would never recommend working, being non-compliant with provincial legislation as it's overriding. We wouldn't be able to move forward in that way and enforce some provincial legislation and not others without risk to the corporation.
Then may I supplement that? My assumption is, and I'll look to Councillor McCann, I would read this as, having the answer that although we might ask staff and are potentially motioning staff to investigate, I'm hearing, it's a no, and I'll look to staff to clarify that. But I'm wondering if it's an amendment to your amendment that it's more of an advocacy approach to the provincial government. And maybe that's an echoing what other municipalities are doing, but I'm not sure if it's a productive step that we might see a change in outcome by going to staff. Rather, it's about voicing our concern for the current restrictions, and that I would happily support, echoing that from health and wellness, we want to see a change in the provincial current state. But I'm just wondering, Councillor McCann, if that helps to align your intention with what might be the best process to get there. So I guess my question to you, Councillor McCann, might be, would you be open to changing your amendment? Because I don't think it's a friendly, I think it's considerably changing it potentially, but where this is actually a redirection to a request to the provincial government that we are advocating for access to our outdoor sports amenities, inclusive of the following that you've listed, be it public or private.
Councillor McCann.
Councillor Congo, I want very strong language here. I want very deliberate language, and I'm not looking to have a fluff session to our premier. I want this to be strong, and I want our residents to know that we're going to do everything in our power to help with their mental and physical well-being. And quite frankly, I don't even know what you asked me. Like, I don't know what you're wanting to change. Like, you kept things up in the air. So being ambiguous and being cloudy isn't where I want to be right now. I want to be strong, and let's hope that after the May 2-4 weekend, after the long weekend, that the premier maybe listens to his own specialists, and that the premier understands and, quite frankly, uses common sense that you can purchase a car in a car dealership, you can go to Walmart, you can go to Costco, and I see lots of people not social distancing, but you can't play golf. And just to be clear here, I'm a really bad golfer. So I'm not missing anything having golf here. But when it comes to mental, abilities, I am, quite frankly, repeating myself again, but I'll say it again. This is beyond ridiculous. And our premier needs to factor in mental and physical illness. And we need to make some serious change. So I'm if you're looking to soften this up, I'm not interested, right? And I'm looking to, if you're looking to strengthen this up, I'm all for it.
Councillor Kungle.
Thank you. So to be clear, my intention is to support getting you the best possible outcome we're looking for, and that is to redirect this to a letter to the government. However strong you would like the language, I think you can make that work within the letter and direction to staff. The way I read your amendment is that you're asking staff to investigate the feasibility of going against provincial orders. I'm pretty sure I heard from staff, and I'll let Ms. McAlpine clarify that, but I think the way the motion is framed is a dead end for us. So I'm looking at actually targeting your desire to the government, not to staff, and directly through a letter, and that language can be as non-cloudy as you like it.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Kungle. Next, I have Councillor Aylwin.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. And I want to thank Councillor McCann for bringing forward the item for discussion, because I'm very supportive of the original item that was tabled. It is absolutely unacceptable that residents in the city of Barrie can't go out and enjoy our outdoor spaces safely. And that's against the advice of the provincial advisory table, which you've noted, Councillor McCann. And absolutely, I think we should be advocating as forcefully as we can to the provincial government for that change. This needs to change. Our residents need it, and this change needs to happen now. So I will be supporting the item as originally printed, but after hearing from our staff that they would never recommend that we go against provincial law, I don't feel comfortable putting our staff in that position. And I think we actually, as Councillor Kungle noted, have a stronger position if we have a clear message to the provincial government that we want them to make the change. So there's no legal ambiguity here. It's clear, it's allowed, and people can go and enjoy the outdoors safely. So I won't be supporting the amendment, but I do support the original item as printed. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Owen. Councillor Morales.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. I'm trying to find tweets here, but I think at one point or another, whether CP24 or Twitter, the mayors of my three favorite cities, that Barrie, Guelph, and Brampton, have all kind of had strong opinions on this, right? Like it's been really unifying. So again, I don't want to misquote anyone, so I'm trying to find tweets and stuff, but I'm finding here Mayor Cam Guthrie obviously saying this is a disease of people, not playgrounds, and then going through it and says this needs to be reviewed, was how he closed that. It was a longer tweet. And in the middle, our kids' mental health and physical health is important. Limit numbers, yes. Social distance, okay. Wear a mask, of course. Close them down, no. So, Mayor Lehman, is there an opportunity? You represent us well at LUMCO, and you guys have a lot more, I would call it, political access and influence than letters. Not to say the letter's bad, but do you currently, does the association have any plans to kind of have this discussion that Councillor McCann wants to have? Again, I've seen Mayor Brown on CP24 a couple weeks ago all over this, and I'm supportive of your original motion, Councillor McCann. I think I'm also supportive of your amended motion, but I think it should maybe be both. Write the letter and hope that they change the policy, get staff to look at how we would move forward if they don't change it. And at the same time, maybe somehow loop in there that Mayor Lehman, as our LUMCO representative, which he was going to do anyways, right? But that he kind of really bring this forward and work with the other mayors who have been public about this, and tries to get us that first outcome that you want, Councillor McCann. Because right now we're spinning our wheels on whether, will staff do something that's contravention to medical policy? Yes, no. Obviously, the answer is no. But so, Mayor Lehman, what I guess the question to you is, what's the temperature at LUMCO right now, whether individual mayors or a unified approach, and would it be reasonable to add another amendment to have you kind of advocate for this? And I guess your thoughts on if they don't change the policy. Again, Mayor Cam Guthrie was saying this needs to be reviewed, about a month old. And I remember Mayor Brown having said that he was going to be discussing with the Brampton's legal department about the implications of not following those orders. So this isn't a new sentiment necessarily.
Thanks for the question, Councillor Morales. And first of all, on the basic question, I really appreciate this item in support of a position that I've had publicly for a little while now, and I completely agree with. So I appreciate Council supporting the original motion. I appreciate Councillor McCann bringing it forward. The caucus at the moment is actually right in the middle of discussing this issue. About half of the members of the caucus are on public record already with a call for this that's been going on for several weeks. And you're correct, the Mayor of Brampton's been very active on this, Mayor Guthrie, Mayor Senzig, and St. Catharines, and others. Yes, the matter will be, it's now Ontario's big city mayors. We jettisoned the terrible acronym LUMCO. It's Ontario's big city mayors, or OBCM, and that caucus is considering how we advocate on it. As you may be aware, there was a vote in the Ledge today, and there are apparently some live discussions going on as well. And the minister sort of cracked the door a bit around the timing of when the government might loosen these restrictions. But I appreciate Barrie City Council adding their voice. On the second part of the amendment, I'm not sure what it would accomplish given what staff have, or at least on the amendment. But you didn't ask me about that, so I'll just answer your question, Councillor Morales.
Mayor Lehman, thank you. I thought I did. My apologies if it came off that I didn't. Is there any chats among the mayors of the big city caucus mayors group there, that do any of them have intent to direct their staff essentially for that kind of option that Councillor McCann was talking about, what to do if the province doesn't change it? Again, I saw Mayor Brown express a social media post probably over a month ago. It was a different situation then, so maybe that's changed. But I'm wondering if municipalities have that kind of plan B, because I think Councillor McCann's amendment does get ahead of the issue. Even if it's a no is a no. or a no, but we'll do this differently. That's fine. I don't see it being a waste. But I'm wondering if you have anything from, because you sit at a table with these decision makers.
Councillor Morales, it's fair to say you can't have two sets of rules. You can't pick and choose from the order what you like and you don't like. You can only advocate for change. and we should advocate in the strongest possible terms, and I think the government should change it. But we can't decide which laws we're going to follow and which ones we aren't.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I did see another hand. My apologies. Councillor Harvey, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I do appreciate the theme behind this, but I can't support it because it's very apparent from a legal perspective that it would place us in a very precarious position as politicians. When a police officer, a bylaw officer, or a special constable is sworn in and swears to an oath, they have to put their biases aside and enforce the laws that are there, whether they like them or not. And for us to, like you said earlier, start to pick and choose what they're to enforce and what they're not to enforce, that's not our job as politicians, and it potentially places us in a very precarious situation. Plus, when you really look at it too, when it comes to the Barrie Police, we have no control over what they do when it comes to enforcement, and we have limited controls when it comes to our bylaw enforcement. So for those reasons, I will not support it because I just don't think that legally and ethically we can support the direction of this amendment.
Thanks, Councillor Harvey. Councillor Natalie Harris.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. I really loved the wording of the original motion, and that I would support for sure, 100%. I'm in the same thought. If Ms. McAlpine says that we can't enforce something that goes against the health unit, then I'm strongly suggesting we maybe go back to the first one. So I can't enforce the second.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Harris. Councillor McCann.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. And this is pretty much exactly how I thought it was going to play out. But I'm going to ask, Councillor Harris and Councillor Harvey, maybe just to put your strong opinions on the shelf right now and just maybe hear me out, and maybe I'll go further down the rabbit hole so you can understand my method and why I'm positioning myself this way. And like I say, I predicted that, people would want to follow my first, amendment because it's a little cleaner and it's a little maybe less risky. But do I think that miraculously Don McAlpine or city staff are going to miraculously find a loophole in our legislative law that are going to allow us to change the laws? No. But do you think writing a letter to Doug Ford is going to have an impact? Debatable. No one's going to know that. But do you think that if Doug Ford hears a city the size of Barrie, with the intelligence of Barrie, right, actually wants to rebel against him, do you think that maybe he'll actually hear that message a little louder? And my answer is going to be yes. And I'm actually, so I got such strong conviction here that maybe I'm going to ask CEO Michael Prowse, how much time do you think that city staff will actually take to come up with the answer? And I'm willing to pay for that service out of my own pocket. So through you, Mayor Lehman, if you could ask Michael Prowse, are we talking minutes here? Are we talking hours? Are we talking weeks to figure out how much time it'll take?
Mr. Prowse.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. Through you to Councillor McCann. Councillor McCann, I think in fairness, this wouldn't be back in the napkin approach. This has legal implications, and I think in addition to legislative affairs looking at it, legal would be looking into the implications and exposure related to it. So while on its face, it does seem like a very easy answer, even if the answer is no, staff would not be comfortable doing that without having done some research to support that rationale, based on council asking for it.
Well, you didn't really answer my question about the amount of hours. You're talking this would be 10, 20 hours of staff time?
Mr. Prowse?
Through your Mayor Lehman to Councillor McCann, I apologize, Councillor McCann. I'm not sure I could estimate specifically what it is. I'm assuming we would probably be able to do that research in-house and not have to resort to outside legal counsel. but I'm sure between Ms. McAlpine and Ms. Peters, you're probably, I don't know, 5 or 6 hours of staff time if I had to guess.
So if I were to pay for this personally, staff time, so the argument of this being staff time costing staff time, right? Is that something that legally I'd be able to do?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor McCann. Councillor McCann, I'm going to tell you honestly, I don't know.
Right.
I'm happy to get you an answer on that. I've never actually had that question now in almost 20 years around City Hall. But I don't see why you couldn't pay for it, but I'd like to be able to get a confirmation on that if that would be okay.
I guess, if you can stay on there, Mike, if you don't mind, at my town hall meeting at Wednesday at 7 o'clock, the theme is to find a better way. And that's what I'm trying to do right now, is find a better way that this community that we love, Barrie, can get people out into our sports fields faster to help with mental health and physical health. So I need this council to know how serious I take this and how serious I want the Premier to change, his law, and get residents back in. We have simply sacrificed enough, right? Financially, and now physically, and now mentally. And to me, it's his experts and just common sense that tell us that this should happen, that this needs to happen. So I'm not going to retract my amendment. I'm reading the room, quite frankly, and I'll probably lose 10-1, and I'm okay with that because I want on record how strongly I feel about this, and then we'll vote maybe on the original amendment or the original motion. Thank you.
Any further comment on the amendment, Councillor Morales?
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. I tried to point of order, but I muted myself. The comment I'll make about my point of order is an amendment to write a letter or to plan for Plan B. That's one thing, but and Councillor McCann, this isn't personal. I have felt this way when in previous councils, members of council have said, "Oh, I'll throw in $3,000. I'll throw in $2,000." That's when we start, having to. I know you care passionately, and you're putting your money where your mouth is, and I appreciate that. But that's a major change in how we do governance, right? We're legislative, and we start all of us saying, "Well, I'll pay this, I'll pay that." That's if you want to review remuneration and hours involvement, that's a major policy change. So it's not just a simple amendment to this. And I know you only intend it to be for this one item because you feel passionate about it. That's fine, but that's always been a big bone of contention for me. I'll give an analogy. It's almost the same frustration that when teachers have to pay for their own school supplies because they know that if they go through the proper channels of getting it, it'll take forever or they won't get it and they start paying for it themselves. It's a slippery slope. Anyways, Mayor Lehman, I wanted to call the point of order on that because what the councillor was proposing is a major substantial policy change that's more macro in nature and doesn't speak to the amendment. But I've heard
Councilor Morales, please. I haven't put that item on yet. Okay, that was just discussion.
So we're on the amendment. So I understand the communication of the amendment. Let me ask Councillor McCann a question then. Would it be your intent that staff reach out to the health unit as well, or would they do this in by themselves, or at their discretion on who to reach out to?
I mean, I'm not either way. I mean, I think it's important that our residents know that we're fighting, right? And whoever this message get there, I think there's enough mayors out in Ontario that are fighting the good fight. That I just wanted to have a very strong message from a city councillor and then get council support. So I think I'm reading the room real clearly here, and it is 9:21. And I've got nothing more to add to my amendment.
Okay, are there any other comments on the amendment? Okay, seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor of the amendment? Those opposed to the amendment, please indicate. The amendment fails. On the main motion, as printed. Any further comments or questions? Okay, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? None. That carries. Okay, the two remaining items I do expect are going to take a little bit of time. I'm going to call a 10-minute recess. We will return at 9:32. Please be back online promptly at 9:32, and we will start the meeting again. A 10-minute recess. Okay, folks, 9:32. I'll just ask everybody to come back into the meeting. Okay, we do have, oh, there's Councillor McCann. We're good to go. Welcome back. I'll call the general committee meeting back to order. We skipped over the item to do with the Ontario Community Building Fund, the SADLON Arena. It was put on by Councillor Harvey and held by Deputy Mayor Ward. Deputy Mayor Ward, over to you.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. I'll put the motion on the floor. I do have an amendment for paragraph 1, and it's basically just the first part of it that's being changed, and that would be this. The amendment would read that staff in the Recreation and Culture Department, Services Department, report back to General Committee before completing and submitting a grant application for the Ontario Community Building Fund. Then the rest of the motion would stay exactly the same through parts 1 to 4. And I'll speak to that.
Okay, so the items on the floor is printed, and then the amendment would be to direct a report back before submitting the grant application. Go ahead, Deputy Mayor Ward.
Thank you. I just think it's due diligence. We need more information before we can actually submit this application. I'm not saying if it's a good or a bad idea, because I just can't tell from the information that we have. We have time. The Ontario Community Building Fund isn't even taking applications yet. They haven't even set the criteria for those applications. I mean, nothing's been set yet. So we know it's not going to happen next week. And if it happens next week, we're going to get enough time before we have to submit our applications. We don't know the criteria for applications. We don't know if there's going to be a funding maximum. For example, if they release it and say there's a $2 million cap on grants and this is a $6 million project, well, that's probably going to kill it right there. But we don't know what the cost will be, or how much money will be eligible. So that's one reason I wanted to press pause. We just aren't even sure this proposal will be suitable either financially or realistically for this program. And there's just, in my mind, there's just too many unanswered questions that we don't have here. We need this information from staff before we decide as a city whether we're going to go ahead with this project. We don't know the cost. I mean, we've heard anywhere 5 million, 8 million, 9 million, it could be more. We just don't even know. And I think it's really important that we know the actual cost of this before we go through the trouble of submitting an application. We have no idea the operating costs. It maybe it'll reduce the operating costs, which I think are about $250,000 for the Molson Center, or sorry, SADLON Arena. It could be more, it could be less. We just don't know. I mean, what will this do to the operating costs or with the operation subsidy of that? And it is important to know because that's going to affect future budgets for the next 20 years in the city. We don't have any idea of the design. We have a rough idea in paragraph 2 what it'll look like, but I'd like a little more information than that because I'm not even clear. Are we building a conference center here? Are we building an expanded arena? If we're building an expanded arena, how many more seats are we getting? And what's the extra revenue going to be? I mean, there's just too many questions that I haven't got answered yet to know whether this is a good project or a bad project. And I agree, it's the kind of thing that we can fund from our municipal accommodation tax. This could be a project we can use it for, but I think there's a lot of other projects. And I'd like to know, get an idea from staff as to how we're going to use that municipal accommodation tax. We're certainly not going to use it all in this. You know, we know that we're only going to get about a little over 300,000 this year from it because of COVID. Hopefully we'll get 600,000 in the future, but there are other things that we're probably going to use that money for, including big projects like the like a new Fisher Auditorium, perhaps a convention center, an expanded SADLON Arena, but there's lots of other tourism related things that we want to use that money for. And I just think we have to know what kind of project staff thinks we should be using that funding for before we commit to a big project like this, which would probably take up half the fund for, let's say, the next 10 or 20 years. I'd like to know whether there's other ways to fund this. As an example, you could put a $2 surcharge on every ticket to every event at the Molson at SADLON Arena. It takes a while to get used to it. And that could be a way to help pay for it. I'm not saying we can't use the municipal accommodation tax as well, but maybe we could get half from municipal accommodation tax, half from a surcharge on tickets, which a lot of other places have done to pay for facilities such as this. So I guess I just want to see whether this is a better, I want to report back from staff before we commit to this. We have the time. Let's just see let's just flesh this out a bit. I know that Councillor Harvey actually said, you know, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. I think we are planning to fail here because we're not doing the proper planning. So let's take a step back, put it on pause, get some information from staff, and then we can decide whether this is an application. There may be other things in the city as well that we want to tap this fund for. And I'm not sure if we can submit 2 or 3 applications. If this is the only one, if it's the one and it looks like we're going to fail, whatever, I'd rather spend the money on doing maybe $1 million project that we know we have a better chance of getting funding for. So let's put it on pause. Let's see what staff has to say about it. Thanks.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor Ward. Councillor Morales and then Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. And I would like to commend Councillor Harvey for the level of detail in his email. It was like the email that never ends. I kept scrolling and he kept giving me more detail, which was great. So he definitely has fleshed out this idea in terms of the way he wants to move this forward. Deputy Mayor Ward, I have a question for your amendment. Does it include the following scope? And if it doesn't, would you accept it as a friendly to be included? It was kind of the way you ended. I want everything you talked about, and I want to add this to the report. Staff come to us and go, this is what the project is likely going to cost. So we're going to probably get Mr. Pugh's in department to give us an analysis or a range at least. This is the likelihood that, like you said, we're going to get $1 million or 5 or whatever it is. But also a list of priorities. I want staff to flat out say, we want to take money from any grants, but if you're going to bother going down this rabbit hole, do it for this. Or they're going to say, we'd rather not you do it for this. We'd rather you do it for the farmer's market. We'd rather you do it for an unbuilt theater. And I'm very clear about that. It is unbuilt. This one is a little more realistic, maybe moving forward. So I'm concerned about the opportunity costs. As you mentioned, if this goes forward and we commit to it, we might be the bandwidth of our financials might kind of be tied up for a bit in terms of new capital projects and that kind of those kind of facilities. So I want an explicit response from staff about, yes, this is in tune with the strategic plan. This is in tune with what we have in motion. You guys would be, out of your minds not to apply for this funding, or yes, please apply, but why for this? Do it for the farmers market instead. Do it for the Griffin Theater. Do it for other facilities that, again, I don't have them off the top of my head, but my main priority is opportunity cost. And does your amendment, Deputy Mayor Ward, include staff being very explicit with us about their wish list, their priorities list, and the consequences of doing this in terms of how it would tie us up financially from financial commitments and staff time overdoing other projects?
Thank you, through you, Mayor Lehman. And I didn't want to bog down with my amendment with all kinds of things that we wanted to have. I'm assuming staff is taking notes. They're going to take this into consideration when they report back to us. A lot of these things will be included, including your comments just now. But I didn't want to get into a big debate tonight about, item by item of things we wanted to see in it.
Okay, thank you so much.
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Your Worship. I am supportive of the amendment. I guess we might have to refine it a little bit. And I'll be quite honest with you, when it comes to the way the wording is right now, this was as a result of discussions that I have had with staff that I was advised that I would have to direct them to apply for this grant. So when it comes to the wording, that's why I worded it in the fashion that I did. However, if people around the table are more comfortable with a couple of words being changed, that they would report back. I guess my only concern would be we have no idea when this is going to open up, because the operational stream from this same grant was extended by a week and ended up closing on May the 5th. Then this stream will open up in due time, and I would suspect sooner than later. And a lot of times with these grants, you've got a very short window of opportunity to be able to compile your grant and submit, and sometimes as short as a 30-day window. So that's why I wanted it to be the talks and discussions and preparation to start occurring now, because it was plan now or else you're going to fail. And so I disagree with the terminology that Deputy Mayor Ward used there. And some of his comments, I'll be quite honest with you, are unbased. As Councillor Morales stated, I sent an extremely lengthy and involved update in regards to this entire project, along with the stakeholders involved, whether it's Curling Canada, Skate Canada, or the Barrie Colts. And I want it to be clear, this is not about the Barrie Colts. This is about tourism and economic development for the Barrie and our area. This is a stream of, it's the one sector that's been hit the hardest through this pandemic, is our hospitality sector. And when you think about the revitalization that this could put into that sector when it comes to hotel visits, restaurant visits, like I spelled out in my my email to everybody, a Curling Canada event brings in 6 to 10 million in economic development. A Skate Canada ISU event can be as high as $42 million. And that number was from London from 2013, when they only had 74% of ticket sales occurring. So it just goes to show you a building the size of London is even too big for an international event of that nature. Through diving into this and speaking to these stakeholders, it became clear some events you don't need 5,000. Some events, ideally, they do target 5,000. And that's where some of this additional lounge area would then bring us up to that 5,000 mark. That is the ideal number that we would like to target. And it just makes this building far more competitive. It was a great building in 1995 when it opened up. And over the years, many other municipalities around the province have created buildings that are much better, unfortunately. And we haven't done any renovations that I'm aware of to this building or at least any major renovations to this building over its 26 years. And this is to bring it up to grade so that way we can compete for these events and be able to bring in a significant amount of funds into this area that we otherwise would not. Because right now we're losing out to places like North Bay and Thunder Bay when it comes to curling events alone. And their buildings were both constructed in the 50s that then had renovations to bring them up to more modern standards. So that way they could compete for these events. And what more recently, I've had some discussions with our federal counterparts too, because even when you look at the provincial guidelines, like, I mean, it's very vague right now, but it does spell out what the basic criteria for these submissions are. So I kind of take exception to the fact that it's being insinuated that there isn't any criteria laid out. And it's very clear that the criteria based around this grant is going to be for retrofits and expansions of existing facilities. So certain projects that may be in our current capital plan would not even be able to qualify under those guidelines. And realistically, what we're looking at now would be either this project and possibly the market, because there's been some discussion around the expansion of the market. My argument for that would be to show me the economic numbers with a downtown market that would even come close to comparing with the numbers from this sport tourism initiative that this would play under. And also too, in speaking with federal counterparts, part of the 2021 federal budget was a Canada Community Revitalizing Fund. And that is to inject $500 million across the country over a 2-year period starting 2021 for exactly these types of projects, to create some stimulus into areas where they've laid dormant. And especially during the pandemic, like everybody across the country has been hit. I'm sure there's going to be many other municipalities that are going to want to do similar type projects. But I just want to make sure we're in the game and we're at the table. And if anyone can show me another project that will outbeat this on an economic impact and have such a profound impact to our small businesses and our community, then I would definitely support that. But that's kind of where this all came from. This is a huge, sport tourism's become a huge industry, and especially curling. I've never slid a rock down the ice in my life, but when you start looking into it, curling is one of the fastest growing sports in this country over the past decade. And they bring in an immense amount of tourism and money with these larger scale events at the national and international levels. So those would be my comments at this point. I'm okay with staff looking at this and reporting back. I guess my only concern would be the time frame of it reporting back, because what happens if this this grant opens up in the next 30 to 60 days? Is staff in a position to be able to provide that information that's being requested? So I guess my question would be to Ms. McAlpine in regards to that, as to the time frame that they would be able to have those discussions and build off the information that I've provided, and be able to be in a position to be able to submit a grant as soon as it opens up.
Ms. McAlpine.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. Through you to Councillor Harvey. We would certainly make best efforts if Council provided such direction. Given the current workload, some other items would end up being deferred to allow us to accommodate preparing a report without knowing what the timeline is for when the applications will open. We recognize that there would be some urgency. So as a result, we probably need to defer other work for this.
Okay, thank you. I knew it was obviously going to have some impact on other work by city staff now that a report is being requested ahead of this. I'll leave it at that and see how the conversation goes. I'm not against having the report, but I'm somewhat fearful that we might miss the boat on a significant grant, if not multiple grants for this program.
Thanks, Councillor Harvey. Other comments? Councillor McCann.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman, and I will be completely supportive of Councillor Harvey's item discussion, and I'm really not going to say anything different than what Councillor Harvey's done. I know he's done some great back end work, and quite frankly, I think that there's a lot of opportunities with this grant money to facilitate the Paul Sadlon, the Sadlon Center. So just want to council know where my head was, and I'm fully supportive. Thank you.
Councillor McCann, Councillor Kungle.
Thank you, Worship. I'm supportive of the amendment tabled, and maybe it'll come out later, but I'm just noting the reference to the sound system. We deferred that item out of our budget. So I guess I'll watch for that to come back to staff. I think it was about a $250,000 ticket item. So I'm assuming this is including that to maybe cover that cost because we'd instructed staff to fundraise. I'm not sure where staff are at on that, but I'm assuming that'll come back as to whether or not there's been any progress, and if that's money that's, that might have been identified and acquired. I haven't heard that it has in any portion of that money, but that's my assumption around the sound system there. And then depending on this, I'm assuming it'll come back as we know more around the date and timelines, probably with another deferral. And I guess at that time, we'll have the conversation about if this is something that we're not going to invest in as planned, what does that deficiency look like in the current operating of the Sadlon Center? Because I think it will become time sensitive as we go forward. So it's more of a note of observation, and whether or not the timelines that come back with potentially any type of renovation and expansion, if that defers the sound system, will that compromise our contracts and some of those obligations we discussed at last budget? So I'm just noting it there for reference, but glad to see it's been included.
Thanks, Councillor Kungle. Other comments? I had a couple of questions on this, I guess, for Councillor Harvey, and I'm familiar with the proposal that the Colts have developed. I've had the opportunity to review this this vision for a modernized Sadlon Center. Sir, the construction cost estimate or the capital estimate, I think you had at $7 to $9 million, Councillor Harvey, is that correct?
Yes, Your Worship. The information that I was provided it was estimated at 7 to 9. However, those estimates would have been about a year or so ago. That's why I was requesting updated numbers, and hopefully things start to normalize after the pandemic, because right now even a 2x4 is over $11, which is ridiculous.
No kidding. And no, I appreciate that paragraph 3 was to get up-to-date construction cost estimates. I mean, looking at the list of items there, it is difficult to imagine that we would accomplish that for $7 to $9 million. So I think it would be quite important to understand the amount. My second question was related. So this is the capital funding stream of the Ontario Community Building Fund. It was announced in the budget, it's $105 million, but $55 million was to that operating stream, which you have identified as already open, which leaves 50 for the capital funding stream. So I just wanted to confirm that's the pot of money that you're proposing to apply to direct staff to prepare the grant application for. Did I get that right?
Yeah, that's correct. I may have had the 50 and 55 reversed by what you've just said, but
either way.
But yeah, and also too, it'll be interesting to see because they did extend the operational stream by a week. So that almost makes me think that there wasn't enough submissions to cover the allocated amounts. But that was solely dedicated to places of not-for-profit that were related to tourism. So places like Tourism Barrie would qualify for that. One other thing that I would just like to add, if I could, Your Worship, involved in these capital costs too, not within that 7 to 9 estimate, so that way people fully understand the amount of skin in the game that the Barrie Colts will have with this if this does go forward, is the area in which the extended dressing rooms would occur. it would just give them a shell, and that they would be taking care of all the finishings, which would be, I've been told, is estimated somewhere between $1 to $2 million. So they have significant skin in the game if this does move forward, and they're not going to be receiving a whole new place courtesy of the taxpayers.
Okay, and my third question, actually, Councillor Harvey, was related to that. It was around the MAT funding, and I wanted to just confirm your proposal was to, is it to use all of the MAT funding towards this project, all of the annual funding?
No, my intent is not to use all of it. I've had some really good discussions with Ms. Schlichter today, because even when it comes to the MAT, whether it's used for this project or any other project like the theater, anything that's tourism based, other municipalities have actually construed their agreements a little bit differently than what ours are, from what I understand. And they have been putting a certain amount of reserves away for capital expenses, or also too, like, let's say all of a sudden, the city wants to submit for a proposal for a sporting event or whatever. Well, it takes money to do that. Well, now you've got that reserve fund there that can cover the 30 to 50,000 that you may need to be able to put your proposal together to move forward with it. So obviously it's something that staff need to look at. But no, to suck it all up with this one project, that would be totally selfish, and definitely not my intent, because I know we have several very worthy projects that we're looking at, and obviously this is just one of possibly three that I can quickly think of off the top of my head.
Yeah. Okay, and thanks for that, Councillor Harvey. I appreciate that last remark, because I think that is important to me in this issue. So just a couple of thoughts. I'm going to support the amendment on the floor for a couple of reasons. One, I strongly suspect the capital costs for this may be a little different, just on the construction cost escalation alone, but also the scale versus perhaps the initial estimate. And that's related to my second concern, which is that this is a $50 million pot for the entire province, which is also shared by not-for-profits and municipalities. So while I'm hopeful that the criteria, when the specific application criteria, Councillor Harvey's right, it's reading off the website, it says it's for recreation facility infrastructure repairs, sport and recreation facility infrastructure repairs, retrofits and rehabilitation. But then it says to meet COVID-19 public health protocol requirements and local community needs. So I guess there's a couple of the big questions here for me are, a per capita allocation to Barrie of a provincial fund would suggest we would be eligible for about $500,000 here, 500,000. If we go in with a $10 million ask or an $8 million ask, is it even going to be considered? And I think that question might be answered by the province themselves when they come out with the criteria. Regardless of that, I think the project itself is something that, I was part of the pitch for the Memorial Cup when Dale Howarchuk and Mr. Campbell and Ron Hogarth and myself went and pitched the OHL. And we lost because we didn't have the capacity, in part. So this has always been an issue. Barns like London's and Windsor's are able to house more people, and the economics for something like the Memorial Cup work. Same with Skate Canada, and I appreciate Councillor Harvey's work here. We did host the men's tankard in 2013, I think, but we had to rent lights to do it because we needed brighter lights than what was in the then BMC. So, there is merit for sure in the improvements to the SADLON Center itself in terms of, what is possible with a modest expansion to the seating, and certainly the facilities, which are now not good enough to host major sporting events. For me, the question around this one has always been, at what point are you really pushing a difficult angle when it comes to trying to expand a building that is very expensive to expand, and by how much and for what? If we knew we could pack that place with 5,000 to 7,000 people for events on a continuous basis, then there's an obvious return on the investment to expand that facility. If not, if we're talking about one event a year, you got to really look at the economic impact of that and the operating impact of that and run the numbers. So I'm going to support the amendment because I think staff will run the numbers. I guess my only other cautionary note on this one is this is adding a new priority, a new substantial bit of work for staff, which we do a lot of around this table. So I guess my question to Ms. McAlpine, you may be familiar, Ms. McAlpine, already with the work that has been done by the Colts organization to develop at least a concept for what is outlined in the motion. If we sort of take that concept and cost it, what would be the additional work, obviously in addition to a staff report, writing the staff report, what kind of additional work is going to be generated by this motion should council adopt it?
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. I don't think it's a minor amount of work that's associated with this. If you want a comprehensive report that will identify the return on investment, the information provided by the Barrie Colts on their design concept is very attractive. And but staff have not reviewed it in terms of the feasibility and also with the consultation of the stakeholders that's required. So there will be some definite work required to provide a report of the magnitude that council appears to be expecting from the comments.
Okay, and that really is my concern. I'm going to give that some more thought before council next week. I think that one approach that general committee might consider with this item is to simply request some basic information, which would be an up-to-date construction cost estimate for the project as designed by the Colts. That would be less work, I suspect, than because that could be handed to a construction cost estimator, probably return something reasonably quickly. And it's paragraph 1 that requires the consultation to try and make sure that the program meets all the requirements. The other piece that to me is maybe premature is because I think what Councillor Harvey and I listen. I want to really commend Councillor Harvey for bringing this forward, because I've been urging us as councillors to try and be city builders. And I think that's Councillor Harvey's intention here, is to add something that could be a really great addition to the city of Barrie. It's not a new concept, but it is a new opportunity. And certainly there are details in this motion that are new to me, which is great. And clearly there was some work done here. I guess before we give specific direction to staff, I would really like to know more whether we're chasing a grant that's going to make a significant difference and allow the project to proceed or not. So I think I'll think about that before next week, but in the meantime, we could support the amendment and perhaps get a little bit of additional information in the interim. Deputy Mayor Ward.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. I do think it's a valuable project overall. I'm wondering whether by the time it comes to council next week, we could have a memo as to what it would cost to hire a consultant to prepare that report. I don't want to burden staff anymore. I think if it's a minimal amount to hire a consultant to do the work, it might be a good investment. It's even if it doesn't work for this particular granting program, there might be other ones down the road that we can use that report for. So I have no idea how much a consultant would cost. But maybe we can get a memo to give us an estimate, because I fear burdening staff when they should have other priorities as well.
Okay, I'm not sure we even need to direct a memo just to get staff to tell us whether or not they could hire a consultant. Perhaps that's an email to councillors in advance of next council meeting. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think what will assist staff greatly too when it comes to the requirements of these other stakeholders, I will definitely share the information that I have received from both Skate Canada and Curling Canada. And I think once they sit down and have a meeting with the Colts, a lot of these questions will be answered because I know they have had 3 engineers look at this particular project to ensure that it can actually happen. Because I know with some of the seating that they were looking at adding many years ago in an attempt to get a Memorial Cup, it was later deemed that you wouldn't be able to cram as many seats into the place as originally was thought. And unfortunately, the building's not in a position to be able to lift the roof off and add a second deck the way some other places, like I know when the Buffalo Sabres came into the NHL, that's what they were able to do. But just with the way this building's been constructed, the engineers say there's no feasible way to be able to do something of that nature.
Okay, we have an amendment on the floor, and I just want to confirm, Deputy Mayor Ward, your amendment would be to replace, I think you said replace the words complete and submit a grant application for the Ontario Community Building Fund capital stream, and just replace those words with staff be directed to report back on the, was it the potential for expansion?
Report back to General Committee before completing and submitting a grant application.
Oh, my apologies. Okay. Okay, so the amendment is to report back before submitting a grant application, and the rest of the motion stands. Comments or questions? Sorry, one thing I would like to clarify. Just paragraph 4 says that if successful, staff report back to General Committee on financing options and ongoing operational implications. Is that something you would expect in the staff report, Deputy Mayor Ward, or only if the grant?
Yes, I would expect that'd be the kind of information I expect in the staff report.
Okay, so probably we need to remove the words if successful, so that it is part of the direction to staff.
Okay, yes, sure, that staff report, yeah.
Okay. Is everyone clear what the amendment would do? Okay, then I'll call the question on it. Those in favor of the amendment? Anybody opposed? None? That carries on the main motion as amended. Councillor Aylwin.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. I was supportive of the amendment because I think we did need a bit more information before committing to a project like this. But I also won't be supporting the motion as a whole for a couple of reasons. I think we've heard from our staff this evening that other work would be put on hold to do this work, and that concerns me. We have strategic priorities that we have set as a council, and I think there are other projects that we are looking at that fit better into those strategic priorities. We've just struck a Performing Arts Center task force. We've struck a Market Precinct task force. And I think it's important that we let those groups do their work and come back to council with their recommendations, because there may be requests for funding, capital funding, or otherwise as part of the work of those groups. We also have a tourism master plan, and having looked through the tourism master plan, there is a section on sports tourism, and it says, based on the assessment of Barrie's sport hosting infrastructure, the current mix of sport facilities in Barrie provides a good base for community use and some provincial competitions. And then there's a section on theater and the arts, and it says, given the close proximity of GTA-based organizations, Barrie is currently missing out on a significant potential for hosting meetings and conferences, as well as significantly larger theater and concert productions that would drive incremental visitations, tourism, and MAT revenues, economic impact, and destination brand awareness. So to me, that's fairly clear where the tourism master plan stands, that there's we're missing out in terms of arts and culture. And the reality of this proposal is that it would require capital funding of some sort above and beyond what's available through the Ontario Community Building Fund. And as Mayor Limon, you pointed out, that funding is very limited. There's a maximum of $250,000 for the operating side of things, and I can't imagine with such a small bucket, 444 municipalities in Ontario and all not-for-profits, that the upward cap would be much more than that on the capital side. So the reality is we're going to have to find a funding source, whether that's through the municipal accommodation tax, which we know isn't that much per year, and we have other priorities that we need to spend that on, or just through our capital plan. again, I think we have strategic priorities in place, and we should be working on those rather than embarking on this project that, let's be real, would primarily benefit the Barrie Colts, a private company. So I can't support the item as printed. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Aylwin. On the main motion as amended, others. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Your Worship. I can appreciate Councillor Aylwin's comments. However, the intent of this is not to affect any other capital buildings that we are looking at. He will still get his theater. The theater group is so far away from being able to even propose anything. It is years away, whereas this particular project already has initial drafted plans. And the only reason this is coming forward is because there definitely appears to be grant opportunities available. And I would hope between one, if not two grant opportunities that we could receive some substantive money. And to think that we're not going to at least try to get in the game. If you don't shoot, you don't score. And this isn't all about hockey. This is about the other sports involved. And to be quite honest with you, when you look at the economic impact that these 3 different sports that could go into that facility at higher levels and the economic impact that it would have to that hardest hit community, I'm not going to be the one that's going to feel comfortable walking into a restaurant and telling someone that it didn't get approved because we decided to do another project when they're barely able to keep the lights on right now through this pandemic. And when you look at the economic impact that would go directly to that hospitality and restaurant sector, it's astounding numbers. And that's why I've brought this forward, because I don't see any other project within the city that would bring that influx of economic development into our community, whether it's our small businesses and any of the offshoots that are related to these events.
Thanks, Councillor Harvey. Councillor McCann. Nope. Councillor Jim Harris.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman, and thank you both, Councillor Harvey and Councillor Aylwin. I had a good conversation with Councillor Harvey the other day because I had the same initial response. How would this particular endeavor impact things that we don't currently have? You know, I've looked at the Community Building Fund capital stream, and there's not much to read. It's very brief. But there is one piece we haven't mentioned, and it's in the bottom, it talks about in order to ensure equity and consideration of unique regional needs across the province, each of the OTF 16 catchment areas will be allocated a minimum of $3 million for distribution. So likely at most, if you divide the 50 million what's left by 16, you've got 3.125 million, and that's for the region, the area. So my worry is that even if we were approved, this would be a very small number, and there'd be a lot of money to make up. And then the challenge would be, where does that money get made up from? So, but having said that, I do recognize that this fund is for exactly what Councillor Harvey is suggesting, which is the upgrading of our now 26-year-old facility. I do think it needs to move into the new age, and I agree with Mayor Lehman and understand the challenges associated with getting major events, and also just keeping pace with a facility that needs to be updated, upgraded, and it's probably in due time. I really liked probably Deputy Mayor Ward's amendment. That made me feel comfortable to accept this going forward. Otherwise, I was quite nervous, to be honest. So I think this will give us some information to see how viable this is, and then we go from there. And I do like the idea of having a plan for the multi center, so that when these things come up, we're not left scrambling. I understand, and I also understand, I appreciate Deputy Mayor Ward's comment about staff time. We all understand how busy they are, how much volume of work that we flow their way. So I did like the idea, and I know actually a couple of years ago, maybe a year and a half ago or so, I mean, Triple B Architects, who I think were involved in the first build, actually I spoke to Gary Green about this very project. I know we spoke to CEO Prouse. So there's people out there who do these kind of things. So if the staff can do a more simplified version, I'm happy with the explanation that was provided by Ms. McAlpine, and so I'll support this. But I will say I'm a wary observer of the potential outcome, but and the impact on other. That would be my sticking point. Would be that how it impacts other facilities that we don't have and we desperately need them. We're planning for, and we're using staff time to help us create a game plan for. So thank you for bringing this forward, Councillor Harvey, because I think it's important. And thank you, Councillor Deputy Ward, for the amendment. I think it makes it at least palatable to review and see where this goes. So I will support it.
Thanks, Councillor Harris. Councillor Natalie Harris.
I'll be quick. I would like to shoot and score with this. That's that. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Harris. Any other comments? Seeing none, I'll call the question on the motion as amended. Those in favor? Those opposed? One. That carries. As amended. Okay, we have one remaining item that was held tonight. Was held by Councillor McCann, was also put on by Councillor McCann, but the conversion of tennis courts. Go ahead, Councillor McCann.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. So I'll put the amendment on the floor, and I'll have an amendment. Go ahead.
Yep, go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. So it's to do with pickleball. That Staff and Development Service Department investigate the feasibility of constructing a 13 to 14 professional grade pickleball courts with a shaded seating area and potential for a winter dome at a city-owned park to be funded from the federal gas tax and the community reinvestment reserve for potential construction in the spring of 2022, and report back to General Committee.
Okay, so Councillor McCann's put an amendment. Sorry, is it? It's an amendment to the motion, huh, Councillor McCann?
Correct.
Okay. And would you care to speak to that?
I would. Thank you, sir. So, you know, my nature is aggressive, and my nature is to understand the call of urgency. And so my original item discussion was to convert Painswick tennis courts into pickleball courts for a multitude of reasons. I'm an avid tennis player. I'm playing tennis, you know, 7, 8, 9, 10 times a week. And I'm on the, I'm at Lennox, I'm at Queen's Park, I'm at Eastview, I'm at private courts, and I'm also at the Big Bay Point courts. And quite frankly, I've never really had to wait at Painswick. And very rarely am I playing beside somebody. But something always surprises me that when I look down at the brand new pickleball courts, there's always a sea of 10 to 15 to 20 people gathering around to play in 2 courts. So those 2 courts can accommodate either 4 people or 8 people, whether you're playing doubles or singles. So I guess I'm just going the long way around Lake Simcoe to say that there is a absolutely gigantic need for new pickleball courts. So I guess I wanted to give a little detail why I drastically have changed my amendment, because you know, I've had conversations with CEO Prouse about the items discussion, and that we've got, you know, items discussion that are back 2 councils ago, right? So we need to be efficient with our city staff. Our city staff are running on fumes, as some are and some aren't some of the time, not all the time, as someone said earlier today. And I would like to give staff some breathing room. I do still want to keep the sense of urgency, but I want to be a team player here, right? We're all in this to make the best city possible. We're all in this to accommodate our staff, and we've just doubled our gas tax, so we're getting double the funds. Thank you, Gary Harvey, for introducing that to me last week. And also, we've got a community reinvestment reserve fund from Electra, and I think that this project is ideal for this. So in case I've lost some of you, because I've been, like I said, going around the long way around Lake Simcoe, there is an absolute gigantic need for more pickleball courts. And pickleball is, and I'll challenge Councillor Harvey, to his curling comment. I believe pickleball is the fastest growing sport in North America. It'd be interesting if, I never knew that curling was, but interesting comment. I think I said this earlier, it amazes me the culture in pickleball. You have 6-year-olds, you've got teenagers, all the high schools are teaching pickleball. I believe it started in the States 20, 30 years ago, and it's just grown tremendously. And a lot of tennis players are integrating, or sorry, not integrating, but leaving tennis to play pickleball because just quite frankly, it's easier on the joints, right? And that's why in my amendment here, I asked for a tournament style, because I've had 3 conversations in the past 10 weeks, one with Tennis Canada, one with Pickleball Canada, and one with Rogers Cup, which is the international tennis championship played at in Toronto. And all 3 of these directors want to come to Barrie to play pickleball. Like, this will be a major tourist attraction. But quite frankly, you need to have pickleball courts that are together, not scattered across the city. We were led to believe, that's my feeling, I was led to believe that the courts would be made in 2 years at the new facility in the southeast corner of Barrie. But quite frankly, we haven't acquired the land yet. And so that could actually be 4, 5, 6 years down the road. So that's why I put a strong item on last Tuesday to get it into today. So we'd have courts for this year, because if anybody's still paying attention, I'm very passionate about Barrie residents getting out and sweating, burning calories, and getting out in the community. So I'm asking for council support for staff to come back with information, and I'd like to put this on a high priority list, so the pickleball courts will be played next spring. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Councillor McCann. Councillor Kungl.
Thank you, Your Worship. So comments, and I'll ask staff to correct me, but I was revisiting the numerous number of hours that we've spent with staff and representatives, including Councillor McCann, about expanding pickleball. And we've got an amazing community. I'm aligned to wanting to see pickleball courts expand, and very grateful that we've had one in Redpath that just opened up this May. I do, recognize that we've got a community that's now become a not-for-profit, that they are growing in numbers and interest. And I wanted just to revisit what I understood the current plan for expansion was, because I thought we had a plan that covered this off, although the timelines don't align. So we had looked at Painswick in the past, and my understanding is that in addition to what we've previously approved, which was expediting the conversion at Redpath by a year, we were actually looking at adding 2 more courts to Painswick to make it a 4-court location, and that would actually provide a level of play. It would bring it up to a community level of play, and that lights would be accessible in 2023. So already doing some great revitalization that was in the plans there. My understanding, because along the intention of, I believe where we got through a lot of conversation was, where could we establish standardized, regulated court size to have regulated competitive games? And this would tie nicely into tourism, but also I believe would need to be at minimum of an 8-court location. And my understanding was that staff were looking at, we communicated this to the pickleball community, Hewitt's. So they're in the plans, although it wouldn't be until 2025. We would be looking at Hewitt's for a tournament venue and expanding the draft plans that already exist there for 4 pickleball courts. So while I would love to see this ramp up from an efficiency of staff and cost, I believe the location has been identified, and that we would end up with kind of the competitive style of play. So I pause around supporting a dome and this type of scope. And I'm wondering if I'll look for more conversation about this, but I think it would be great to have staff come back around the recommendation, because there have been a lot of hours put into this. about whether or not it's even feasible, and maybe that could be something discussed at city building and having broader dialogue on this. So with that, because I'm seeing this, I'm aligned to the intention of getting a site, but it's a lot different than I think where we left off through a lot of dialogue with staff, that I won't support it at this time, but I'm keen to have conversation about it.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Kungle. Councillor Morales, you were next.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. Great motion, great item for discussion, Councillor McCann. I'll be supporting it. I'll be supporting it for this couple of reasons. I think around the table, I'm sure maybe we had avid watchers of council at the time, but Deputy Mayor Ward will remember, Mayor Lehman will remember, and I'll remember. I would have been 14 to 16 at the time. Barrie saw the tennis dome die for the downtown, the Queen's Park Club. Many reasons, it is what it is, but just to give members of council some update, essentially the Barrie Community Tennis Club, which was private, like its intent wasn't to really turn a profit. So it was kind of in between community and private club. They applied for a fund, a grant to the federal government. At the time, the MP was Eileen Carroll, I believe, and they got lots of money. And they had to essentially put a business plan to it and get approvals, and it didn't go through at city council for various reasons. That's not the point. The point is that money had to be sent back. So can you imagine? I that always stuck with me because I used to play tennis back then. Can you imagine the politicians, the staff members, the community groups doing all the work and sending back? I think it was at least 40,000 plus, might have been in the six digits, a check to the federal government because we couldn't find a way to make it work. I like that Councillor McCann is addressing the ever-evolving trends in sports from tennis to pickleball. I like that he's identified about the lack of waiting times and those courts not being used as much as Eastview and Lennox, which those two for sure are being used quite a bit. And I really support the amendment. I'm also supportive of the bubble for the fact that I like the strategic South End location. I know there was concerns back like over a decade ago about putting a bubble that competes with the private sector, considering there's one in Midhurst. A, different sport for the most part, and B, completely servicing a different market as well. So as I've said before, I always like repatriating grant money and taxpayer money from other levels of government if people are already paying the money. So if we're bringing it home to Barrie, that's always a good thing. And this is definitely very well overdue. One important thing I think members of council should note is if we got a bubble, let's say we go down this rabbit hole, we end up getting a double, this will extend the life of the asphalt. Having the bubbles in the winter extends the city asset. So it reduces maintenance costs and likely at least lengthens the lifetime of them. So at the moment, I'm very supportive of this. I don't think this goes against staff's the park plan that got reviewed a couple of years ago. It doesn't necessarily go against it. What Councillor McCann is doing is identifying a trend of pickleball that has picked up in the last 2 years quite at quite a quick speed, and has essentially allowed us to add that into our park plan. Our park plan moves slow, which is fine. It's a policy, but pickleball has really picked up, and I commend the work Councillor Kungle and Councillor McCann have done on this pickleball. I always see the work they've been doing from afar. You always have my thumbs up on that. But this one is also very similar to Councillor Harvey's motion. There's an opportunity to possibly apply for funds or at least use funds from the tax, from our gas tax. I know that it might only end up being the tax gas if there's no other funds, but it's a good opportunity to, again, extend the asphalt, address an emerging or changing in sport, and also get people outside. We've already spent time talking today about getting people outside in mental health and sports, and definitely, again, as the ward councillor for that location is definitely underused and could definitely benefit from some traffic and definitely strategic in terms as well as for access. So I'll be supporting this.
Okay, the amendment's on the floor. Any further comments? Councillor McCann.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman, and I just want to thank Councilor Morales for your support. Just so we're all clear tonight, we're not asking to spend any taxpayers' money tonight. What we're asking staff to do is to come back with a proposal that, hey, here's a great spot for this land. The 8 court is old news. The director of Tennis Canada, the director of Pickleball Canada, and the director of Rogers Canada, so you need a minimum of 12 courts to have a real tournament, and that is what the Barrie community is starving for. I just want to maybe let council know that there's like 6 independent groups with 10, 20, 30, one has 260 members that are calling me on a regular basis. You know, I love my city and I want to support my city, but it's getting intoxifying. There's so many calls because the demand is so great. And so the bubble, I'm not asking to put a bubble up. I would, if this passes and we find a location, I would take it upon myself to do a lot of the due diligence and find a private partner that would, be interested in a 20 or 30-year contract that would pay 100% of the bubble. They may need some type of partnership with the city for the cost funding, but we'll debate that later on. And there may be some funding from Trillium or from other areas. So I just don't want this to be confused, because sometimes maybe my enthusiasm and my fast talking maybe, and especially at 10:30 at night, is difficult to process. Tonight, we're looking to say, yes, we identified that there's a need for more pickleball courts. We've got 3, guys. We got 3 courts and over 500 people wanted to play from ages 3 to 9 to 100. We're identifying that staff. I've already talked to Michelle Banfield and Andrea Miller, that giving them some breathing room over the summer, that they'll be able to come back with a report, that they and then if council supports it, that they'll be able to build this facility in the spring. And then the dome, I just want to make sure that when they're looking at this facility, that they pencil in the ability to put a dome up. We're not voting on a dome tonight. So I just want to make that crystal clear for everybody listening. Thank you. And voting.
Okay, I do see Councillor Kungle and Councillor Morales again. I'm just going to urge you to keep your remarks short so that we can bring this to a vote. Go ahead, Councillor Kungle.
Sure. I guess the time frame that's identified as spring, for me, I have some concerns with, just because of whether or not that's viable. If the best location is for an area that, we've heard from staff that could potentially be Hewitt's, that might not be ready to go until 2025, and don't want to get too far down the path of procurement in those pieces. So happy to keep the conversation going. I love the focus on expanding access to pickleball courts. I guess I'll table a comment to, and I don't want to refer it back to city building necessarily, but I'm not supportive of the restrictions that this is putting on the ask for staff at this time.
Okay, Councillor Morales.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. Quick question, Councillor McCann. Is it easy to convert? Let's say we go with the pickleball courts. They're done. They're built. They're put in the ground. And the uptake, for some reason, isn't where we wanted it to be. It's a pretty flexible space to switch back to tennis courts or do a hybrid, right? It's not a major game over. You have to rip everything up. It's a pretty versatile design, theoretically.
You could, it's fiberglass that I'm looking for, right? Which I'll identify that with the professional pickleball courts. And yes, I mean, if somehow pickleball starts losing traction and now all the pickleball courts are empty and tennis ramps up, the conversion would be minimal, right? But I'm just telling you that with this being an aged sport, I'm not sure if that's proper English, a lot of people in their senior years are playing. And I got to tell council, it's remarkable, because I mentioned to you earlier that there's like 10 or 20 people surrounding pickleball courts. Well, it's not like, yes, they all are looking to play, but it's a culture. And that's why I've asked in my amendment to have some shaded area for some of the age appropriate spectators that would like to have some shade because of the intense heat we get here in Barrie. And so they may stay in the pickleball area for 8 hours. Okay, I'm not joking you. And so it's a real culture that is emerging. So anyways, I know I'm talking a lot. I'm passionate about it. I'm right in the weeds of pickleball and tennis. And I did, just to comment on Council Congo, I did talk to staff and they did say that they very easily could do the research and come back with a report. And if it was approved by City Council, have the courts delivered in the spring.
So thank you, Councilor McCann. The other point I'll make, it's if, again, the bubble, we're not voting on the bubble, I get that, I'm not trying to muddy the waters, but if we got the bubble, in my opinion, it will be successful. But that bubble, just like the courts, are also very versatile. That bubble could go to Eastview if the demand is that it's at that location. It could go to Lennox, it could go to in Strabane, it could go to another end of the city. So that asset, sure, it could be a private operator that owns the bubble 100%, 90%, 50%. I don't know what it means. The bubble isn't just wasted. It is a asset. So again, once we kind of go down that rabbit hole, I just want members of council to know we're not taking a risk on the asphalt or the bubble. To Councillor Congo's comments, I don't want to send this to City Building Committee. When you have an idea like this, when you've got possible money, when you've got some momentum, sending it to committee, and I appreciate her respect for staff's time. It's when you send an idea with momentum to committee, it's where it essentially sometimes kind of slows down and dies. To answer the question about if it could go in the annex lands and the secondary plan there, I had actually brought this up with a couple of the landowners that have phase 1 and phase 2 lands in Ward 9 that essentially already have zoning, and they're popping up units. If we could incorporate a tennis bubble, because one of the arguments over a decade ago was bubbles are great, but if only if the residents who are buying in that area already know that hey, you're going to get a bubble. You don't want to put it in them once they've been living there for decades. That was the main argument why it died. So I wanted it to be clear that, hey, could we put a bubble in the Ward 9 look at kind of like phase 1, phase 2 lands? And I got to know, the developers were concerned that the sales of the units would be harder to sell and that it would cost them money.
Morales, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I got to push you back to the amendment on the floor. I'm starting to get a lot of complaints here. We really do need to move this to a vote. So I'm just going to ask you to keep your comments to the amendment that's on the floor.
Yep.
I'd like to call the question on it. Thanks.
Perfect. I'll wrap it up. I support the timeline, Councilor McCann, on your amendment. I don't want to wait till possibly 2025 because the answer I've already gotten on some lands, it's no. And at that project, I'd rather have a feasible, successful project now than wait for future development of areas that are unknown. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Any other comments on the amendment that's on the floor? Councillor Congo.
Sorry to do this again. So, I mean, I'll support it because I do want to see the conversation continue if there's no appetite to refer it, but I will look to staff to see if they could bring any additional information forward, because it does feel like the timelines are disconnected from a lot of other conversation that we have had about what fits and where. And I don't want this to basically jump frog where this might be intended to go based on a timeline push.
Okay, Councillor Congo, did you want to move an amendment at all?
Let's refer it to city building and see if I win or lose the vote.
Okay, there's a referral, a motion on the floor. I will call the question. It is non-debatable. Those in favor of referring the matter to City Building Committee, please indicate. 3, those opposed. Okay, that fails. On the amendment that's on the floor, any further comments or discussion? Councillor Thompson.
I'll be really quick through you, Mayor Lehman. I will be supporting the amendment. It's for information, but if we've learned anything, we should never bring up bubbles. We filled the for Ward 4's bubble, so let's leave it where it is, and I will be supporting this.
Thanks, Councillor Thompson. So on the amendment, members of General Committee, I'll call the question. Those in favor of the amendment? Opposed? 1. That carries. On the main motion as amended. The only comment I'm going to make is this is the 3rd new project we're adding tonight to staff's workload. We really need to think about what our priorities are going to be, I think. I will call the question on the main motion as amended. Those in favor? Opposed? 1. That carries. Okay, that completes the items that were held. That brings us to inquiries with 20 minutes to go till 11. Deputy Mayor Ward.
No,
inquiries of
definitely
staff.
not.
Members of General Committee, any inquiries of staff? Councillor Natalie Harris.
Yes, just quickly, I have a couple questions about the textile collections. People are wondering if we are able to use the blue bags or not just the clear bags, and is there a limit to how many you can put out?
Got the same questions today. Thanks, Councillor Harris. Ms. Miller, are you able to answer those?
Yes, through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Harris. There is no limit, so certainly people can put out multiple bags. We do ask that they are in the clear bags, though, so you know, just so that the pickup, the textile pickup people can understand that that's in fact what it's for.
Okay, thanks. Any other inquiries of staff? Okay, seeing none. Announcements. Deputy Mayor Ward.
No.
Councillor Aylwin.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. Going to kind of tag team this one with Councillor Natalie Harris. Today is the International Day Against Homophobia, Transphobia, and Biphobia. And I think it's important as a council that we recognize that there's Natalie's shirt. Love that. It's amazing. I think it's important that we recognize the challenges that the 2S LGBTQ community still faces in this country and around the world. And here in Canada, we know that trans people in particular face violence on a regular basis, face disproportionate struggles such as poverty, homelessness, lack of access to healthcare. So we have a lot of work to do to combat homophobia, transphobia, and biphobia. So thanks to Councillor Natalie Harris for support and for council's support on that.
Thank you very much, Councillor Owen. And yes, I have proclaimed today, as we do as International Day Against Homophobia, Transphobia, and Biphobia. Normally we would have a flag raising, and we've often had great support from members of the trans community who've been here for, in particular for this day. It's a shame that we can't do that flag raising today. But thank you for your comments. Councillor McCann.
I didn't put my hand up, but I do have an announcement. She must be clairvoyant.
Sorry, I thought I saw your sign. Go ahead. And then Councillor Morales, you're next.
Sure, great. Well, I'm hosting a Zoom town hall meeting this Wednesday at 7 p.m. Please check all your mailboxes because there is a paper copy that's been delivered to all Ward 10 residents. And I see Councillor Jim Harris is yawning. Well, there's some actually in your ward too, Jim. So you mean get ready, and probably some of Sergio's. You can visit my my Facebook site, Mike McCann Loves Barrie. What's that, Gary? You want me to repeat that? It's Mike McCann Loves Barrie. And the theme for Wednesday night is going to be, this is your city. This is your money. This is your community. This is your community. Let's find a better way together. And I've got a bunch of honored guests. Obviously, Mayor Jeff Lehman is going to be the guest. Also, CEO Prowse is going to be a guest. I would actually, we're going to be talking about how we talk about taxes. We've got police services as a guest. And we've got two guests that I'm really excited to announce tonight. They're actually Dean Maltby, Superintendent of Education, and the new high school principal for the new Ward 10 high school, Maple Ridge High School. And they've actually going to do something really unique. They're actually developed a 5-minute virtual video that they're going to actually show what the high school looks like. And this is state of the art. I was talking to John Dance, the superintendent, a lengthy conversation, really trying to rebuild the bridge and the relationship we have with the school board, which is obviously really needed. And I'm just really happy that Tracy, the new principal, and Dean Maltby, the new superintendent, has come to say their piece. Now, we've got an hour for this town hall meeting, and I've structured this meeting a half an hour of presentations and a half an hour of questions. So I'll be speaking for 10 minutes about Ward 10 specific questions. I'd ask the mayor and ask Michael Prowse to keep their verbiage down to 5 minutes each. I've asked police services to speak with 5 minutes, obviously focusing on Ward 10, but talk about the city as a whole. And I'd ask that the new high school, that they keep their presentation down to 5 minutes. So that's 30 minutes and then 30 minutes for question and dialogue. Once again, you can visit Mike McCann Loves Barrie. And we're going to talk about recreation and parks. And I've got a new section in my town hall meetings. It's the motivational and inspirational comment. And I'm actually going to be discussing something that I'm pretty excited about. And it's going to be to have some motivational and inspirational signage all along Ward 10, where I'm going to be taking the funds that has been allotted to every ward councillor, and I'm going to ask all Ward 10 residents to chime in and be able to come up with an inspirational quote, whether it's original or whether it's copyrighted from another person. Obviously, I have to put the documentation, and I want to put these signs all across Ward 10. And if it works out great, I'll obviously share the success with the other councillors, and this could be something that we put out throughout the whole city. And last but not least, we'll be talking about the Love Barrie sign that'll be downtown Barrie. And once again, every city council member that's here tonight is definitely welcome. Staff, you're more than welcome to join, and the whole city is welcome to be born. I'll be doing some radio commercials on Wednesday, inviting the whole city to attend the town hall meeting. So last but not least, thank you, Mayor Lehman, for allowing me to expand the information. Visit Mike McCann Loves Barrie.
Thanks, Councillor McCann. And yes, I know our office has got the Zoom link set up for that. And actually, I've got more time for the town hall, so I'll actually be answering people's questions after that hour's over, and happy to stay online and chat with residents after the hour's completed. It's been a great experience with all the other ward town halls to be able to take people's questions, and I look forward to doing that on Wednesday evening as well. Councillor Morales, I have you next.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. Do you have the announcement over the draft OP? You already have that on your docket?
I do, but why don't you go ahead, Councillor Morales?
Ooh, okay. I appreciate it. Councillor McCann, number one, I don't have your energy. Number two, my suit jacket doesn't match my couch behind me. So it's going to be a fraction of what you have. But anybody out there, draft OP, second draft is up and running. Check buildingbarrie.ca. Comments, oh, that got to you, eh? Comments due by June 2nd. Email, phone, contact staff. And this applies to really anybody. I am very impressed at how receptive our staff is. I talked to the director of planning last week, and like, you know, this isn't a thing about like they put out a draft and they're trying to justify the draft and kind of being resistive to feedback. No, they are welcoming any and all feedback. If you think that certain designations are appropriate, not enough, too much in different areas of the city, now's your time. This is for residents. This is for landowners. This is for businesses. This is for community, social stakeholders. This is how our city is designed, envisioned to grow, long-term sustainable growth, where traffic flows properly. I took a very quick look at the draft plan. I think it was Thursday, and I saw some sites around town that made no sense on why they were at the moment, it's a draft, why they were neighborhood area instead of, for example, medium density. And it's good conversations to have. So once again, if anybody out there wants to review the draft plan, provide the input, please go to buildingbarrie.ca, sign up for the town halls, the Q&As, or attend the meeting on June 2nd. And if you can't do either of those or wish not to, you can also write to City Hall on paper, or you can just email in your comments as well. So that's all due by June 2nd. So you can do it before, and buildingbarrie.ca.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Morales. Any other announcements, members of the General Committee? Okay, I'm going to cut down the list. In addition to today being the International Day Against Homophobia, Transphobia, and Biphobia, May 19th is Personal Support Worker Day, and has there ever been a tougher year to be a PSW? We will be celebrating their contributions and the selfless and tireless work that they've put into providing care to our community's most vulnerable. May 23rd to 29th is Victorian Order of Nurses VON Week for addressing health and social needs across our community. And similarly, the nursing community cannot be praised highly enough for the work that they have done for all of us during this pandemic. The City of Barrie is partnering with the County of Simcoe on the Work in Simcoe County Virtual Job Fair. This is a virtual job fair that will be on Wednesday, June 2nd from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. This will be an online career platform. Local hiring employers can connect with job seekers through one-on-one text chat, audio, and video. Registration is now open and is free for both job seekers and employers. Historically, we've seen turnouts of more than 1,000 people at our job fairs. And by being able to do this virtually, we can connect you anywhere that you can connect to potential employers. So if you're looking for a job in Barrie, the city and the county are here to help you out. Ontario government is looking for public feedback on how to strengthen municipal codes of conduct. Public comments are welcome via an online survey to be submitted by July 15th. You can participate by visiting ontario.ca/consultation. City is offering 2-hour free parking in the Chase McEachern Way and Maple Avenue parking lots until June 30th. That's for the finishing touches and repair work on the Dunlop Streetscape project. I think the rest we have mentioned before. Just a couple of additional ones though. Residents wishing to purchase a rain barrel, they are available until May 21st for $70. You can go to barrie.ca/water conservation or call Service Barrie 726-4242. I should note there will be no meeting Monday, May 24th due to the Victoria Day holiday. General Committee and Council will resume the next day, Tuesday, May 25th, when we have a couple of very important matters on our agenda. So we will have a rare Tuesday meeting of General Committee next week. Members of General Committee comments on the circulation lists, May 10th, last week's. Okay, seeing none. May 17th, anything from tonight's? Councillor Kungl.
Yes, thank you. Just 2 comments very quickly, but importantly, one is on the circulation list to point out for members of the public. A5, the annual report from our Barrie Fire and Emergency Services. So thank you. Just wanted to acknowledge an exceptional year in service and want to appreciate that. There's great data and information in there, and I wanted to take a moment to extend a thanks. And I think some of the stats include over 20,000 emergency response calls across all municipalities that are serviced. So kudos to Chief Mainprize and the team. Thank you for all you do for the community. The other one I wanted to point out, just because it is time sensitive, is to draw the public's attention to the circulation list that talks a bit about the call for nominating a senior. So there is a process to nominate a Senior of the Year award. That process closes on the 31st of this month. I know there's a lot of them out there in the city of Barrie to celebrate and showcase. So it is an invitation to please circulate that, lift that, share it with any of your networks. Again, it's due the 31st, and it's to highlight, to honor the outstanding local seniors and contributions to enrich the social, cultural, or civic life in our community. And that's all my comments.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kungl. Any other comments on the circulation list from tonight? Seeing none, that completes this General Committee meeting agenda. Before I adjourn, members of council, I know you need to log back on using the new link, I believe. Ms. Cook? Yes. So this completes our General Committee agenda, public agenda for tonight. This meeting is adjourned. Members, could you please log on using the other link? Take care, everyone. We